Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the fanfiction guy. Back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Was Adopted by Pro Heroes. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. At 3:07 p.m., a large apartment building was engulfed in raging blue flames. 8-year-old Izuku Midoriya rushed toward the inferno, throwing his school bag aside. Just before he could reach the burning structure, a thin white cloth wrapped around him, pulling him back. He struggled against the hold, pleading for his mother, who he believed was trapped inside. Pro hero Eraserhead, who had intervened, held Izuku firmly in his arms, trying to keep him safe. The boy fought desperately, screaming for his mother. By 3:49 p.m., firefighters had arrived, and the flames were nearly extinguished, except for the top floor where the Midoriya family's apartment was located. Suddenly, a window on that floor flew open, revealing a frantic woman. Tears streamed down her face as she called out for her son, expressing her love for him. Izuku, still restrained, looked up, his heart racing. When Eraserhead's grip momentarily loosened, Izuku seized the opportunity and sprinted forward. Just as he reached the building, it exploded, sending him flying backward, and he lost consciousness. 2 days later, at 9:45 a.m., Izuku awoke in a brightly lit hospital room. A man with long, black hair and a dark bodysuit sat beside him, watching the steady beeping of the heart monitor. As Izuku opened his eyes, confusion washed over him. Eraserhead quickly called for a nurse, but when he turned back to the boy, he saw sheer horror etched on Izuku's face. Eraserhead approached cautiously, asking for his name. The boy stammered, introducing himself as Izuku Midoriya. When asked about the events leading to his hospitalization, Izuku's voice trembled as he recounted the fire and his desperate attempt to save his mother. Panic surged within him as he realized his mother was missing. His voice grew frantic as he demanded to know where she was, tears streaming down his cheeks. The doctors rushed in, but halted at the sight of the fragile boy. Eraserhead drew Izuku into his embrace, struggling to maintain his composure as he delivered the heartbreaking news that his mother had not survived. The boy went limp in his arms, utterly shattered. Eraserhead expressed his sorrow, holding the boy close, trying to provide comfort. After a moment, he gently asked if Izuku had any other relatives. The boy's response was a quiet no. When asked about his father, Izuku revealed that he had left and that he didn't know him. His voice was devoid of emotion, leaving Eraserhead deeply concerned for the boy's well-being. Eraserhead explained that Izuku would be placed into the foster care system, assuring him that a caseworker would help him find a foster family. He handed Izuku a card with his contact information, encouraging him to reach out if he needed anything. Izuku nodded, still in shock. As Eraserhead left the room, he paused to look back at the broken child, silently wishing him well. Soon after, a group of doctors entered to check on Izuku, eager to assess his condition and provide him with the necessary care. At 5:23 p.m., a timid knock interrupted Izuku's thoughts. He looked up to see a young woman, no older than 29, standing in the doorway. She introduced herself as Ichika Yamamoto, his caseworker, and asked if she could come in. He nodded in response. Ichika took a seat next to his bed and pulled out a clipboard, ready to ask him a few questions. She began with his full name, which he provided, spelling it out carefully. Next, she inquired about his age, to which he replied that he was 8 years old. When she asked about his quirk, Izuku's face turned red as he looked down, nervously fidgeting with his hospital gown. He admitted that he did not have one. Ichika noted this and then asked which school he attended. He told her he went to Masagaki Primary School. Thanking him for his cooperation, Ichika acknowledged the difficulty of his situation, showing empathy for the challenges he faced. Izuku waved goodbye to the woman who had just spoken to him, promising to find the right foster family for him. He hated the term quirkless. It felt like a label that followed him everywhere, marking him as an easy target for bullying. His classmates, like Kaken, had impressive quirks, while he had nothing. The weight of that realization was heavier than ever, especially after losing everything he owned and his mother. He felt powerless, believing that if he had possessed a quirk, he could have saved her from the fire. Kaken's words echoed in his mind, reinforcing the belief that he was just a useless Deku, nothing more than a burden. 2 years later, at the Yamada Ito residence, Izuku faced another night of frustration. His foster mother, Kimiya Yamada Ito, yelled at him for missing a spot while cleaning the floor. He had been living with the Yamada family for 3 years, as no one else wanted to foster a quirkless child. Initially, they had seemed kind, but once the caseworkers stopped visiting, their true nature emerged. Izuku became their personal maid, responsible for cooking, cleaning, and laundry. He had to tread carefully, knowing that any mistake could lead to severe consequences. School was his only escape, but even there he faced relentless bullying. His only solace came from studying to become a hero and dreaming of a better future. As he locked himself in his room, he sensed Mr. Ito's drunkenness. The man rarely drank, but when he did, his temper escalated. Izuku sought refuge in his closet, but in his haste, he knocked his head against the wall, causing a small card to fall. It was a contact for Eraserhead, a pro hero. In desperation, Izuku typed a message, pleading for help. Just as he sent the message, Mr. Ito broke through the door, searching for him. The man's anger was palpable as he called out for Izuku, threatening to drag him out. Slowly, Izuku emerged from the closet, only to be grabbed and thrown against the bed frame. Curled up on the floor, Izuku tried to escape the looming figure above him. A sudden sharp pain struck his back as he was kicked. Just then, a figure burst through the window, wrapping Izuku in familiar white cloth. The voice of All Might filled the room, but he halted mid-sentence upon seeing Izuku's condition and the chaos around him. He confronted Mr. Ito, demanding to know if he was responsible for the boy's injuries. Mr. Ito defiantly replied, dismissing Izuku as a nobody. All Might then ordered Eraserhead to take Izuku to the nearest hospital, insisting on immediate action. Eraserhead complied, carrying the half-conscious boy away, worried about the blood loss and what had transpired. The next day, Izuku awoke in a hospital room, greeted by the sight of Eraserhead and Present Mic. He attempted to sit up but winced in pain. Eraserhead urged him to relax, and Present Mic shared that they wanted to adopt him, if he was willing. Izuku was taken aback. He had always admired them as heroes, and now they wanted to help him. They explained that they saw his heroic spirit and resilience. They wanted to raise him to become the hero he was meant to be, expressing regret for the treatment he had endured. Overwhelmed with emotion, Izuku could hardly find the words to respond. But when he finally managed to say yes, tears of joy streamed down his face. Eraserhead embraced him gently, though Izuku winced at the movement, reminding him of the pain he still felt. He struggled to focus on the two men, his vision blurred by the pain in his back. Eraserhead leaped up in concern for Izuku, noticing the bedsheets beginning to stain. Present Mic rushed out of the room to summon a doctor, and upon his return, they hurried Izuku off to surgery. Later that night, at the Yamada Aizawa residence, Hisashi expressed his worry about leaving Izuku alone. Aizawa reassured him that Toshinori would stay with the child and call them when he woke up. He then embraced Hisashi, asking if he was okay. Hisashi attempted a smile but faltered, admitting he felt guilty about not being able to help Izuku. He broke down, sobbing into Aizawa's chest, revealing that Izuku was like family to him. Aizawa comforted him, reminding Hisashi that they were not defined by their families and that they could work to right the wrongs done to Izuku. The next day, at the local adoption center, Eraserhead and Present Mic entered, greeted by an elderly man at the front desk, who was busy typing on his computer. Eraserhead cleared his throat to get the man's attention, requesting an adoption form. The man handed over a pile of papers, asking if they had completed the necessary inspections. Eraserhead confirmed they had, explaining they had been waiting for the right child to adopt. The man then questioned their situation, implying that they needed a mother to fill out the form. Present Mic, feeling the tension, clarified that both he and Eraserhead were present. The man's dismissive attitude became apparent as he expressed his disapproval of same-sex couples adopting children. Aizawa felt anger rising within him but was held back by Hisashi, who, with sadness in his eyes, requested the paperwork. After grabbing a sheet, he shot a disdainful glance at the man before leaving with Izawa. Back at home, Hisashi urged Izawa not to let people like that man affect them. He emphasized that retaliating would only make them as bad as those who disrespect them. Izawa expressed his frustration about the disrespect they faced while simply trying to be happy. Hisashi reminded him that they needed to wait for the world to catch up, and then excitedly suggested they fill out the adoption paperwork together. After completing the forms, Hisashi could hardly contain his excitement. Izawa, covering his ears from Hisashi's exuberance, reminded him to keep his voice down. Despite their soundproofed home, Hisashi sometimes forgot to tone it down when he got excited. After a brief apology, they hopped into their car to deliver the paperwork to their caseworker. 2 days later, at the Yamada-Izawa residence, the phone rang. Izawa, anxious about the caseworker's call, urged Hisashi to answer. Hisashi, unable to contain his excitement, put the call on speakerphone. The caseworker introduced herself and announced that they had been approved for adoption, declaring them fathers. Overjoyed, Izawa and Hisashi exchanged looks of pure happiness, with Izawa even tearing up a bit. They expressed their gratitude, and the caseworker informed them they could retrieve the child from the hospital at their convenience. The hospital. Eraserhead and Present Mike arrived at the hospital. After showing the head nurse their identification cards, they were allowed to enter young Izuku's room. He had woken up from his surgery the day before, and the doctors said he could leave that day. The two heroes approached Izuku's open door and found him staring out the window. They watched him for a moment, taking in the deep, sad, pensive look on his face. Eraserhead decided to break the silence by knocking on the doorframe. When Izuku looked over and recognized them, his face lit up with a wide, genuine smile. They asked if they could come in, and Izuku giggled, finding the question amusing. Present Mike, already having developed a nickname for the child, asked how he had been. Izuku playfully reminded him that they had just seen each other the day before. Present Mike shrugged, saying he thought he would ask anyway. He reached over to ruffle Izuku's hair, but the boy flinched away, fear flashing in his eyes. Present Mike regretted forgetting Izuku's sensitivity and quickly apologized, opening his arms for the boy. Tentatively, Izuku crawled into them, and Mike stroked his hair, calming him down until he began to drift off to sleep. Before he was fully asleep, Eraserhead tapped him on the shoulder and asked if he was ready to go home. Izuku nodded, his head still nestled against Present Mike's chest. Together, they left the hospital, one of Present Mike's hands in Eraserhead's and the other holding the sleeping boy. This marked the beginning of a new, beautiful family. The same day, Izuku was sitting in the back seat of the car when Hisashi pulled into the garage. His eyes fluttered open, revealing their brilliant green color. Hisashi glanced in the rearview mirror and noted that Izuku had woken up. He cheerfully informed the boy that they were home and suggested they go inside. Izuku nodded and slowly got out of the car, still groggy from his nap. Shota unlocked the door and held it open for the other two, grabbing Izuku's hand as they walked past. At first, the child was apprehensive, but he gradually melted into the man's grip and squeezed back. They entered the house together, and Hisashi offered to show Izuku around while Shota mentioned he would take a shower. Shota smiled and encouraged Hisashi to go ahead, knowing he needed to help the boy trust him, especially after what Izuku had endured in the past. Hisashi smiled lovingly at Izuku and told him it was just the two of them now. As he began to walk, he felt a small tug at his sleeve. He turned to see Izuku looking down at his feet, shyly asking if he could hold Hisashi's hand. Surprised by the request, Hisashi happily agreed and gently took the boy's hand, leading him down the hall. He pointed out the bathroom, kitchen, living room, and the bedroom he shared with Shota. When they reached the last room, Hisashi opened the door labeled Izuku and let the boy enter first. As Izuku stepped into the room, his face filled with awe. The room was perfect for him, adorned with action figures of his favorite pro heroes, including All Might, Eraserhead, and Present Mike. A bookshelf held all his school books and a few others he had acquired over the years. The walls were painted a pale blue, and a bed with red, white, and blue sheets was pushed against one wall. The closet was filled with new clothes that actually fit him, unlike the too small clothing he had worn before. When Hisashi asked if he liked it, Izuku's face lit up and he ran into Hisashi's arms, embracing him tightly. Hisashi noticed the boy had started to cry and held him a little tighter. He expressed his happiness that Izuku liked the room, kneeling to be eye level with him. Wiping the tears from Izuku's face, he reassured him that there was no need to cry. Izuku hugged him again, thanking him for the room. Hisashi chuckled at the child's formality and suggested he could call him Hisashi if he wanted. Izuku agreed, feeling more comfortable. Later that evening, Shota, Hisashi, and Izuku sat around a coffee table in the living room, having finished dinner and decided to play some old board games. As the clock ticked, Shota informed Izuku that it was time for bed. Obediently, Izuku got up and headed off to his room. Hisashi and Shota exchanged glances before following him. When they reached his room, they found him already in bed with the blankets loosely draped over him. Shota hugged him and wished him good night, followed by Hisashi, who tucked him in. Pausing at the doorway, he turned off the lights and wished Izuku a good night, telling him to sleep well. 2 months later. That evening, Hisashi began to share his thoughts with Shota, who teased him about thinking too much. Hisashi, undeterred, reminded Shota that they had promised to help the boy become a hero. Shota nodded in agreement, and Hisashi continued, feeling hopeful about their journey ahead. How are we going to do that? He's quirkless. Aizawa wasn't sure, but they had to figure it out. He had witnessed the boy's heart 2 years ago when, despite being quirkless, he ran toward a burning building, trying to save those trapped inside. If Aizawa hadn't intervened, the boy would have rushed in without hesitation. Aizawa's determination to find a way to make this boy a hero was unwavering. Well then, we'll have to start his training soon. I heard Endeavor began training his youngest son at the age of 5. Izuku will have a tough time catching up. Shota sighed, confident in Izuku's abilities. He believed the boy was tough and determined enough to become a great hero, perhaps even better than himself or his partner. You know, in a way, being quirkless has made that boy stronger, he remarked with a light smile, glancing toward Izuku's room. At that moment, a fire raged through the night, consuming everything in its path without mercy. The bright blue flames burned Izuku's eyes, making it nearly impossible to see. Despite the blinding light, he sprinted forward, desperate to reach something just out of grasp. His legs had failed him before, but he refused to let that happen again. He pushed himself harder. He heard a voice calling for help, and he ran as fast as he could, but it was too late. The fire engulfed his mother once more, showing no mercy. A taunting voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of his quirkless status. The memory of being pushed to the ground by Kaken surfaced, and he couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy. If only he had a quirk, maybe his mother would still be alive. Maybe he could have saved her. The fire returned, moving faster this time, as if it were chasing him. He ran desperately, trying to escape, but the terror overwhelmed him. Suddenly he shot up in bed, panting and sweating. Hisashi burst through the door, concern etched on his face. He rushed to Izuku, who was shaking and crying, and wrapped him in a tight hug, soothing him with gentle words. Shota entered, trying to understand the commotion. Seeing Izuku in distress, he joined the embrace, pulling them both close. Izuku, still trembling, asked if he could sleep with them that night. Of course, Aizu, Shota replied, lifting the boy into his arms as they moved to the other room. 3 weeks later, at the Yamada Aizawa residence, Aizawa called for Izuku, eager to discuss something important. Izuku had started calling Hisashi Daddy and Shota Dad, and they felt like a real family. As Izuku entered the dining room, he hopped onto a chair, curious about what his dads wanted to talk about. They explained their desire to give him their last names, hoping to strengthen their family bond. Hisashi expressed that names didn't change their love for him, but they wanted the world to recognize their family. If it made them happy, Izuku agreed to the name change, wanting everyone to know they were a family. With that settled, Aizawa shifted the conversation to training. He reminded Izuku that even without a quirk, he could build strength and learn to defend himself. They had prepared a training schedule, and he wanted to know if Izuku was still committed to becoming a hero. Izuku's determination shone through as he expressed his desire to be stronger so he could save others and ensure they wouldn't have to feel fear. He recalled the helplessness he felt when he couldn't save his mother from the fire and vowed never to experience that again. Alright, then we begin today. Be ready to leave by 5 o'clock, Izawa instructed before leaving the room. As the garage door opened and the car sped away, Hisashi felt a wave of worry wash over him. He tried to reach Shota on his cell phone, but it went to voicemail repeatedly. Something was definitely wrong. Hisashi had tried to reach his boyfriend's phone but received no reply. He felt a wave of worry wash over him, but he didn't want to show it. He didn't want to scare Izuku. He told Izuku that he was going to make a call and that the boy could go play for now. Once Izuku left, Hisashi frantically dialed Toshinori's number. After a few rings, the hero answered, sounding cheerful. Hisashi quickly expressed his concern that Shota wasn't answering any of his calls or texts. Toshinori, sensing the panic in Hisashi's voice, suggested that there might be nothing to worry about and that Shota could simply be driving. However, Hisashi insisted that Toshinori try calling Shota for him. With a sigh, Toshinori agreed and hung up the phone to dial Shota's number. It went straight to voicemail. He left a message urging Shota to contact Hisashi, who was worried about him. Just a minute later, Toshinori's phone rang, and he answered without checking the number. An unfamiliar voice introduced itself as Detective Naomasa Tsukachi from the police department. The detective informed Toshinori that there had been an incident involving an elite villain and that Eraserhead was already on the scene. He requested Toshinori to come immediately and to bring Present Mic with him. Toshinori quickly made his way to the location provided by the detective. Upon arrival, he was met with a chaotic scene. Izawa was being held by a large villain in his own capture gear. Hisashi arrived shortly after in a taxi, with a small boy in the back seat. Hisashi shouted for the detective to take the boy to safety so they could handle the situation. Once the boy was safe, Hisashi was ready to fight, but Toshinori warned him to be cautious, as the villain had Shota in his grasp. The villain, noticing the distraction, launched blades from his hands toward the heroes. One of the blades struck Hisashi's leg, causing him to fall to his knees in pain. Eraserhead struggled against his bindings, cursing his inability to free himself. Hisashi and Toshinori sprang into action, determined to rescue Shota, but their efforts were thwarted when the villain pinned Toshinori's arms against a wall with blades. In that moment, Izuku managed to escape from the detective's arms and sprinted toward the commotion, determined to save his dad. He recalled Kaken's harsh words echoing in his mind, but he pushed them aside, focusing on his goal. With a loud shout, he commanded everyone to stop. Suddenly, time froze, and the chaos around him paused mid-action. Izuku walked through the stillness, confused, and reached out to Present Mic, who unfroze at the boy's touch. Present Mic looked at Izuku with surprise, realizing the boy had somehow caused this. Without wasting any time, he picked up Izuku and brought him to Toshinori, who was also frozen. Izuku lightly touched Toshinori's hand, and he too unfroze. Mic carefully removed the blades pinning Toshinori, and Izuku continued to unfreeze Eraserhead while avoiding contact with the villain. As they exited the alleyway, they found a light purple barrier blocking the detective's entry. The detective looked stunned as the group emerged, with Mic still holding Izuku's hand while helping Toshinori support Eraserhead. When they reached the barrier, Izuku encouraged Mic to move forward. Once outside, they were immediately surrounded by paramedics. Izuku remained unscathed, but the same could not be said for the other three. He was most concerned about how he had managed to stop the villain's attack, especially since he had always been told he would never have a quirk. Confused by the events, Izuku began to mumble to himself, lost in thought until he felt a heavy hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see All Might, the symbol of peace, smiling at him. Despite the bandages on his arms, he appeared fine. All Might praised Izuku for his bravery, stating that without his help, they would have been defeated. He expressed his excitement about teaming up with Izuku in the future. After the encounter, Izuku felt lightheaded. His idol had just thanked him for his help. He had just saved All Might. He was absolutely engulfed in euphoria, that is before he was pulled back into reality by the voice of one of his fathers. Present Mic was in terrible condition, his usually neatly gelled hair now a mess. He had reddened bandages around one of his legs and was barely able to stand. Izuku nodded in response, acknowledging the situation. They needed to go in the ambulance together. The next day, 2:45 p.m. A hospital room. Toshinori walked into a brightly lit hospital room. His arms were in significant pain, but it paled in comparison to the distress he felt seeing his friends in their hospital beds. Shota was still unconscious from the fight, while Hizashi lay in the bed next to him with Izuku curled up and sleeping at his side. Hizashi looked over at Toshinori and put his finger to his lips, signaling for him to be quiet. Toshinori nodded in understanding. He pulled up a chair next to Aizawa's bed, gazing at his friend with a sad expression. He silently urged Aizawa to wake up, knowing that his family and the world needed him. As if responding to these unspoken words, Aizawa's eyes fluttered open. He surveyed the room, recalling the events of the previous day. His body was covered in bandages, some stained with hints of red. Then he remembered how it all ended and glanced over at Izuku, remarking on the surprises the boy seemed to bring. 8:59 p.m. Yamadazawa residence. After the family had completed their quick recovery, thanks to Recovery Girl, they were allowed to return home. Hizashi's wounds healed well, but Shota's situation was different. His arms and legs bore small, straight scars. Recovery Girl's quirk had left him with less energy than usual, and he was sound asleep in the car as Hizashi drove them home. Upon entering the garage, Hizashi gently shook Shota awake. He pointed to the back seat where Izuku lay sleeping soundly. Leaning in close, Hizashi whispered that he would take care of Izuku and urged Shota to go inside and rest. Shota agreed and walked into the house while Hizashi went around to the back of the car and carefully lifted Izuku into his arms. He made his way into the house, taking care to navigate to the bedroom he shared with Shota. He set Izuku down in their bed, ensuring not to wake him. After making sure his son was comfortable, he settled in next to him, placing his arm over the boy and lightly grasping Shota's hand. They all slept peacefully through the night and late into the next morning. He gently set the boy down in their bed, careful not to wake him. Once he ensured his son was comfortable, he nestled in next to him, placing his arm over the boy and lightly holding his boyfriend's hand. They all slept peacefully through the night and into the next morning. The next day, 10:03 am Yamadazawa residence. Izuku woke up curled up next to his heroic dads. Still feeling tired, he lingered in bed, not wanting to disturb the other two men. Soon, he felt Shota begin to wake up beside him. He acknowledged Izuku's wakefulness with a gentle greeting. Izuku responded with a sleepy greeting of his own, curling closer to him. Shota wrapped an arm around him, embracing him tightly. Shota then asked Izuku if he wanted to help make breakfast before Hizashi woke up. Excitedly, Izuku agreed, and they got out of bed, with Izuku still clinging to his dad's shirt. They made their way to the kitchen and began preparing fried rice and eggs. About 20 minutes later, Hizashi stumbled into the room, greeted by the delicious aroma of the meal. Hizashi sat down with his family, remarking on how nice it was to wake up to such a breakfast. After they finished eating, Hizashi looked over at Shota, who motioned for him to take Izuku to the living room. He picked up the small child and headed toward the living room, with Shota following closely behind. Shota addressed Izuku, mentioning they needed to talk about what happened the day before. Izuku nodded in response. Shota asked why he had been saying he was quirkless all this time. Izuku admitted he thought he was quirkless and didn't know he could do what he did. Hizashi, looking confused, prompted Izuku to recall how he felt when he activated his quirk. Izuku closed his eyes tightly, conjuring the memories of the previous day. Everything had gone wrong. All Might couldn't move. He pulled and squirmed until the man dropped him and ran over to the fight. He felt scared and angry. A villain was hurting his family. Izuku lifted his hands slowly in front of him and shouted for them to stop. When he opened his eyes, everything was frozen again. He walked over to his dads and unfroze them. Hizashi cheered for him, while Aizawa, covering his ears, commented on the noise but praised Izuku's impressive ability. He suggested it was time to start training now that they understood what they were working with. 12:07 p.m. A public hero dojo. Eraserhead had a capture scarf specially made for Izuku, expecting him to be quirkless. After discovering his son's quirk, he contacted the company that made the scarf, and they confirmed it would still work as long as Izuku could move. Dressed in his hero costume, Eraserhead took Izuku to a special hero training dojo. Upon arrival, Izuku's eyes widened in amazement. His father instructed him to keep up, explaining that they would focus on using the capture scarf today to avoid overexerting his quirk. Excitedly, Izuku asked if he would get his own scarf. Eraserhead confirmed this and handed him a wooden box, explaining that the scarf would only respond to commands given via brainwaves. Izuku opened the box and lifted the scarf out, admiring it before putting it on. He looked at himself in one of the mirrors and smiled at his dad, pointing out how they looked alike. Eraserhead chuckled lightly and encouraged Izuku to start training. For the next few hours, Aizawa guided Izuku in mastering the scarf. By the end of the day, Izuku could extend and retract it quickly. Aizawa promised they would work on wrapping techniques the next day. They left the dojo hand in hand, still wearing their scarves, only to be met by a horde of press members. Eraserhead held onto his son's hand tightly, pushing through the crowd until they reached their car and drove off. During the ride, Izuku asked if he could pose a question. When Aizawa teased him about already asking, Izuku pouted and clarified his request. He wondered about the scarf's connection to others who might have touched it before him. Aizawa reassured him that the makers had ensured no one touched it with uncovered hands and explained that as long as Izuku didn't willingly give it up, it would respond only to him. This satisfied Izuku, and the rest of the car ride passed in silence. The next day, 7 a.m. Bakugo residence. Katsuki Bakugo rolled out of bed that morning, preparing for school. He always disliked Mondays. After getting dressed, he walked downstairs to find his mom cooking breakfast. Sitting on a bar stool, he waited impatiently and scanned the kitchen for something to occupy himself. That's when he noticed the newspaper. Pulling it towards him, he read the headline, "A hero in training. Is he the next Eraserhead?" Underneath was a picture of Deku holding Eraserhead's hand. Katsuki called out to his mother, demanding to know what Deku was doing with a hero, lifting the paper for her to see. All she did was sigh and sit next to him. Katsuki sensed something was wrong because his mother never called him sweetie. She began to speak about a fire at the apartment where Auntie Inko and Izuku had lived. Katsuki nodded, recalling that it was the reason they had to move away. His mother continued, revealing that Auntie Inko had passed away in the fire and that Izuku had been sent into foster care. She had kept this from him because he was so young, believing he wouldn't be able to handle the truth. Katsuki felt a mix of fury and sadness, realizing that Izuku had not told him about this. He was overwhelmed with questions about what else Izuku might be hiding. In a rush of emotions, he got up and ran out of the house, leaving breakfast behind. He sprinted all the way to school and found a secluded spot behind a bush, where he began to cry. It took about half an hour before anyone noticed he was there. Izuku approached, concerned and asking what Katsuki was doing. Katsuki quickly wiped away his tears and snapped back, insisting it was none of Izuku's business. He pushed past him and hurried to his class. At 3:15 p.m. at Masagaki Primary School, the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Izuku remained worried about Katsuki, wanting to ask him what was wrong but fearing the consequences. He decided to head home instead. Just as he reached the gates, he was grabbed by the collar of his shirt and pulled into a small shed near the main building. Katsuki confronted Izuku with anger, accusing him of lying for 2 years and demanding answers. Izuku, trembling with fear, remained silent, trying to escape Katsuki's grip. Frustrated, Katsuki struck Izuku, and he and his friends continued to push him around, careful not to leave visible marks that would attract adult attention. Izuku lost track of time until he was sure Katsuki and his friends had left. He got up and walked home, feeling defeated. At the Bakugo residence, Katsuki ran to his room and collapsed onto his bed, sobbing into the sheets. He thought that hurting Izuku would ease his pain, but it didn't. He was filled with confusion and anger, questioning why Izuku hadn't confided in him about losing his mother. At 4 p.m. at the Yamadazawa residence, Izuku limped through the door, greeted by Present Mike, who was filled with concern. He asked where Izuku had been, noticing his son's condition. Aizawa entered the room, sensing the tension and seeing Izuku's tears. Aizawa called for Izuku to come closer, and the boy obeyed, slowly making his way to his father. Aizawa knelt down to meet Izuku's gaze, offering to check him for injuries. Izuku agreed, sniffling as they walked to the bathroom. Aizawa lifted him onto the counter and gently lifted his shirt, revealing numerous bruises but thankfully no blood. Aizawa's expression turned serious as he questioned who had caused the injuries. Izuku hesitated, unable to reveal the truth. Aizawa, with a sad look, reassured him that all he wanted was to ensure his safety. After a moment of silence, Aizawa proposed teaching Izuku how to defend himself, to which Izuku nodded in agreement. Over the next few years, Aizawa trained Izuku in self-defense at the Hero Dojo. They also worked on developing his quirk, discovering that it shared similarities with both Aizawa's and Hisashi's abilities. They found that Izuku could focus his sound attacks on specific targets and that he could freeze people through skin contact, controlling the effect's area as long as his voice could reach it. Katsuki's bullying intensified, and although Izuku attempted to defend himself once, he was quickly overpowered by Katsuki's friends. Fearing further retaliation, Izuku learned to hide his pain. Throughout his training, he mastered his quirk and his capture scarf, and after his father's married, he officially changed his last name to Aizawa. Now, Izuku was halfway through his final year at Aldra Junior High. At 7 a.m. in the Aizawa residence, he woke up to the blaring sound of his alarm and got up to turn it off. He took a quick shower and dressed in his uniform. The aroma of eggs, bacon, and fried rice wafted down the hall and into Izuku's room. Sleepily, he walked into the kitchen and enjoyed his breakfast. He bid farewell to his dads, expressing his love for them, and then stepped out the door, beginning his journey to school. At 2:45 p.m., the bell rang to signal the end of class. Izuku was the first to leap from his seat and dash to where he had parked his bike. He hoped Kaken wouldn't catch him today. He sped down the road and was almost home when something caught his eye. Dark green sludge was oozing from the gutter. He thought to himself that he should just keep pedaling, but his bike wheels became ensnared in the sludge. Frustrated, he jumped off and attempted to run, but the sludge began to envelop him. He opened his mouth to use his quirk, but that proved to be a grave mistake. The villain seized the opportunity to invade Izuku's body. He struggled to scream, but the villain pushed deeper, causing his vision to fade. He felt himself on the brink of losing consciousness. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice. All Might appeared, delivering a powerful punch that sent the sludge flying in all directions. Concerned, the hero asked if Izuku was all right. Izuku managed to respond that he was fine now. All Might inquired why he hadn't used his quirk to stop the villain. Izuku explained that he had tried, but the villain had started to suffocate him when he opened his mouth. All Might instructed him to go home and rest, assuring him that he would handle the situation. Izuku nodded, grabbed his bike, and rode away. At 2:58 p.m., All Might was walking down the street in his true form, finding it difficult to maintain his hero appearance for long. Distracted, he barely avoided a truck that came barreling toward him. The driver jumped out, concerned for All Might's well-being. All Might reassured him that he was fine, advising him to watch where he was going next time. He continued on his way to the police station. Moments later, he spotted a large fire and heard the panicked cries of people. His heart raced as he realized he must have dropped the villains he had captured when he dodged the truck. He sprinted toward the fire. At the same time, Izuku was nearing home when he noticed the bright flames a few blocks away, accompanied by screams. Without hesitation, he pedaled toward the chaos. Upon arrival, the scene was overwhelming. What he witnessed shook him to his core. The same sludge villain that had attacked him was now targeting Kaken. Izuku scanned the area, realizing that the hero's attempts to save Kaken were in vain. He knew he had to act. Recalling his training, he focused on how to project his voice without any support gear. He dashed to the center of the fray and warned everyone around him to cover their ears, announcing that it would be very loud. A nearby hero shouted at him in confusion, but Izuku insisted they follow his instructions. Once they complied, he formed an O shape with his hand and shouted for the villain to stop. Instantly, the villain ceased its movements, as did Kaken. Izuku signaled for everyone to uncover their ears and approached the nearest hero, instructing him to rescue Kaken. He explained that if he accidentally touched the villain, it would regain its movement. The hero promptly followed Izuku's directions. Another hero asked how Izuku remained so calm in such a dire situation. He replied that both of his dads were professional heroes and had been training him since he was about 10 years old. Just then, a hero tapped him on the shoulder, carrying Kaken. Izuku signaled for Kaken to be unfrozen, and as he did, Kaken began to thrash around, confused but soon realized he was no longer in danger. Kaken, surprised, questioned how Izuku had accomplished that, as he believed Izuku was quirkless. Izuku confirmed that he had indeed used his quirk. Before they could discuss further, they were separated by a throng of reporters, some pursuing Kaken and others after Izuku. Thanks to his father's connections, Izuku managed to escape the press within a minute, while Kaken was trapped for over 45 minutes. Finally, Izuku made his way home, where he found both of his dads waiting for him, arms crossed and expressions stern. They demanded an explanation for his reckless actions. Izuku raised his hands defensively, eager to clarify. He led them to the living room, where he recounted his encounter with the villain, emphasizing how he might have perished if All Might hadn't intervened. He explained that he had spotted the fire and, without thinking, rushed in to save Kaken. He stood firm in his conviction, believing that his actions had been necessary. Hisashi and Shota exchanged glances, unable to be angry with him, as they would have done the same in his position. Hisashi approached Izuku and embraced him tightly, expressing relief and concern. Izuku smiled and returned the hug, grateful for their support. "That's going to be kind of hard when I become a hero," he laughed. Hisashi broke the hug, and the three of them sat around, enjoying each other's company. After about an hour, their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Shota said he would get it as he made his way over to the door without any particular hurry. Izuku and Hisashi waited quietly for Shota to return when they heard, "Tashinori, what are you doing here?" Tashinori hesitated before replying that he had come to speak with Shota's son. Shota asked what it was about, and Tashinori explained it was about his future as a hero. Shota acknowledged that it was his son's future and couldn't stop him, but he lowered his voice so the others couldn't hear, warning Tashinori to train him well and not to force anything upon him. Tashinori stepped back, shocked by the sudden intensity of Shota's words, and nodded to show he understood. All Might then asked to speak with Shota in private. Shota stammered but led the hero to his room, pausing at the door to remember all the hero merchandise he had. He swallowed hard and opened the door, leading All Might inside. "This is quite the room you have, my boy," All Might remarked. Izuku felt embarrassed by how fanboyish his room seemed. All Might quickly got to the point, asking what Izuku wanted to do with his future. Izuku expressed his desire to be a hero, wanting to keep everyone safe and be like his dads, someone who could reassure others that everything would be okay. All Might was pleased to hear this and revealed that his quirk was called One for All, which was passed down from one generation of heroes to the next, growing stronger each time. He had come in search of a successor, and today he had found one in Izuku Aizawa. He asked if Izuku would take the torch and become the next symbol of peace. Izuku was taken aback, questioning why All Might needed a successor since he appeared to be in perfect health. All Might sighed and looked down, revealing that he was not in good condition. In a surprising turn, steam filled the room, and a frail figure stood where All Might had just been. Izuku was stunned, and All Might explained that not many people knew of his true form, a result of a battle long ago that had never been made public. He would eventually be unable to use One for All, which was why he needed to find a worthy successor, and he needed Izuku for that. After a moment of contemplation, Izuku declared his determination to become All Might's successor, to excel at UA, and to make his dads proud. All Might thanked him and emphasized the need to start training immediately. He would explain everything to Izuku's parents, and they would begin preparations, assuring Izuku that he should rest up, as he wouldn't be cut any slack. All Might exited the room and returned to the living room. Shota asked what had transpired, and Tashinori shared that Izuku had accepted the offer and would become an amazing hero. He expressed pride in Izuku's desire to make his fathers proud. Hisashi, however, felt disappointed that Izuku's training with them was coming to an end. Toshinori suggested that they help train Izuku, noting that he needed to control both One for All and his own quirk. Shota agreed, though he still harbored reservations about All Might choosing his son as a successor. Later that evening, after Toshinori had left, Shota prepared dinner for his family. As they sat at the dining room table enjoying the meal, Hisashi asked Shota why he was opposed to Izuku inheriting One for All. This caught Izuku's attention, as he was unaware of his father's concerns. Shota explained that he didn't want Izuku to get hurt, as they didn't fully understand the power of the quirk. Their only experience was with All Might, and every person was different. What if it was too powerful for Izuku's body? Izuku interjected, stating that he would train harder to become the next symbol of peace. He acknowledged the dangers but insisted on trying, believing that focusing too much on the what-ifs would leave them unprepared for the future. The older two looked at Izuku in surprise. Shota expressed his admiration for Izuku's wisdom and asked him to promise to be careful and to become the best hero the world had ever seen. Izuku pointed out that was two promises, but he was determined to make them proud. With a determined smile, he assured them that he would do everything in his power to succeed. 1 week later, a week after Izuku agreed to inherit One for All. 10 a.m. Izawa residence. Izuku woke up to the buzzing of his phone. He groaned, wondering who could be waking him up so early on a Sunday. After a moment, he picked up his phone and saw a new text from All Might. All Might informed Izuku that they were starting a new training plan that day and instructed him to meet at Beach 4 in 30 minutes. Although confused, Izuku quickly dressed and ate breakfast before telling his dads where he was going. He then ran off to the beach. Upon arriving, he found All Might standing in front of a beach covered in trash. It was hard to believe this was once a beautiful shoreline. All Might greeted him and noted that he was 10 minutes early. He explained that Izuku would be cleaning the beach as part of his training, along with other exercises, with only 10 months left until the UA entrance exams. Izuku stood in shock, unsure how he could manage such a daunting task alone. Despite his strength from years of training with his parents, the challenge felt overwhelming. Nevertheless, he resolved to give it his all. He removed his shirt for better movement and approached the mound of trash, starting to clear it away. By the end of the day, Izuku had only made a small dent in the overwhelming amount of work ahead of him. Exhausted, he began his walk home. Once there, he immediately took a hot shower, and by the time he finished, dinner was ready. The family gathered around the table, enjoying each other's company. Izuku felt a sense of relief knowing that instead of training with All Might the next day, he would be training with his dads. That night, as he lay in bed, Izuku found it hard to sleep, contemplating how he would ever control One for All. All Might had warned him that his body wasn't ready for the power yet and that he could injure himself if he tried to use it. Izuku understood that he needed to prepare thoroughly for the entrance exams, not just for the practical portion but also for the written test. Determined, he got out of bed and reached for his weights. He knew he had to work hard to succeed. He walked over to his desk, opened one of his many books on heroes, and began reading while lifting weights with both arms. Around midnight, he decided he had done enough training for the night and curled up in bed, mentally preparing for the challenges that lay ahead. A week before the entrance exams. 7 a.m. Izawa residence. Izuku woke up to the blaring sound of his alarm. With the entrance exams approaching quickly, his training had intensified. He sluggishly got out of bed and headed to the bathroom, turning on the shower and stepping in without waiting for the water to warm up. The cold water jolted him awake, and he quickly washed himself before stepping out. Over the past few years, he had focused more on training and studies than on his appearance, allowing his hair to grow long. Now, it reached just above his shoulders, and he pulled it back into a messy ponytail. After throwing on some shorts and a t-shirt, he glanced in the mirror and noticed the dark circles under his eyes. Every day after training, Izuku would go to Beach 4 to continue clearing trash. He kept this routine a secret, knowing his family would be upset if they found out. All Might and his dads had created a workout plan to maximize his growth safely, but Izuku wanted to prove he could handle more. He walked to the kitchen to grab a cup of coffee, which he disliked but needed for energy. With Hisashi and Shota still asleep, Izuku began his morning workout alone. He got into a plank position and performed perfect push-ups, counting as he went: 1, 5, 9, 13, 38, 52, 88, 99, 100. After finishing, he wiped the sweat from his brow and checked his phone, realizing it was already 7. He returned to his room to dry off, still enjoying summer break with little else to do. He decided to text All Might to discuss their training plans. "What are you doing up so early?" Izuku always got up at 7. "To each their own," his friend replied. To answer the question, they would meet at noon at the beach. Izuku agreed, promising not to be late, or he would have to run an extra mile. He turned off his phone and looked up at the ceiling, knowing he would be running 2 extra miles today. He pushed himself out of bed and went to his parents' room, poking his head in to let them know he was going to train. After putting on his shoes, he ran out the door. The day before the entrance exams. 5 p.m. Izawa residence. Hisashi scooped his son up in a hug, greeting him cheerfully. Izuku asked what was up, and Hisashi explained that they had filled out the necessary paperwork for him to have his speaker on during the entrance exams, so he wouldn't freeze up like the other kids. Izuku smiled, hoping his dad wouldn't notice how tired he looked. Hisashi assured him it was no problem. Izuku then hesitated before asking a question about the fairness of having 2 teachers as parents during the entrance exams. Shota, who had been quietly listening, explained that they had already spoken to the headmaster. Neither of them would be judging, and the judges were unaware that Izuku was their son. Principal Nizu had ensured that they wouldn't provide any information about the exams, which they hadn't planned to do anyway. He ruffled Izuku's hair, and Izuku felt reassured. Izuku expressed his confidence, stating he could handle whatever challenges came his way. Shota was glad to hear that and invited Izuku to help with dinner, joking that Hisashi would probably burn the house down. As they prepared dinner, Izuku was chopping vegetables when Shota asked when he had last gotten a full 8 hours of sleep. Izuku hesitated, saying he had slept well the night before, but Shota called him out on it, noting his tired appearance. Shota explained that he had once stayed up all night training, just as determined as Izuku was now, but it had negatively impacted his grades. He shared that after leaving UA, he had been homeless despite having a hero agency, as no one knew who he was, and his poor grades made it difficult to find work. He spoke sadly about his past, revealing that his determination had been driven by the same things that motivated Izuku now. He urged Izuku to get some sleep that night, masking his sadness with a smile. Izuku nodded, feeling the weight of his father's words. The day of the entrance exams. 4 a.m. Izawa residence. Izuku was awakened by his alarm and sat up, rubbing his eyes. He had gone to sleep early the night before at his father's request. He got up early to ensure he was thoroughly warmed up before the exam, knowing he had 4 hours and 40 minutes until he needed to be at UA. He began doing push-ups, reaching 100, and then moved on to sit-ups. After finishing his warm-ups, he took his usual cold shower and pulled his hair back into a neat half-up, half-down ponytail. Looking in the mirror, he couldn't help but giggle at how much he resembled his dad, Shota. Once dressed in a black t-shirt and blue shorts, he ran out the door and headed to beach. He had informed his dads the night before that he would leave early and not to worry if he wasn't home when they woke up. Upon arriving, he surveyed the progress he had made over the past few months. The beach was much cleaner now, with hardly any trash left and only a few stray pieces of garbage scattered on the sand. Setting down his backpack, Izuku got to work picking up the last pieces of trash. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he turned it on to see a new message from All Might. All Might instructed him to meet at the beach at 7 o'clock sharp to discuss something important. Izuku replied affirmatively and continued his work. When 7 o'clock arrived, Izuku sat atop a mound of trash, waiting for All Might to arrive. "How did you do this?" Surprise was evident on his face. Izuku explained that he had worked twice as hard as he was told and performed beyond expectations. He wanted to prove himself worthy of carrying the torch of One for All. Tears streamed down his face as he realized he had accomplished what he thought was impossible just months ago. All Might, filled with pride, told Izuku he was ready and beckoned him closer. As Izuku approached, he watched his mentor transform from a frail figure into the hero revered by all of Japan. Might praised Izuku for his hard work and handed him a single golden strand of hair, instructing him to eat it. Izuku was taken aback, questioning the request, but All Might explained that One for All was passed down through the holder's DNA. With little time before the exams, Izuku reluctantly swallowed the hair and was told to shower and change. Excited, Izuku sprinted off, grabbing his bag along the way. At UA High School, he arrived at the grand entrance, feeling a rush of excitement. His fathers had already left to prepare for the exams, leaving him to walk alone. As he approached the magnificent doors, he picked up his pace but tripped over a book bag left carelessly on the ground. A boy with lavender hair caught him just in time, commenting that he should be more careful if he aspired to be a hero. Grateful yet flustered, Izuku introduced himself as Izuku Aizawa. The boy, Hitoshi Shinso, shook his hand before checking his watch and suggesting they both get going. Once inside, Izuku was awestruck by the number of competitors. He shook his head, trying to quell his anxiety, and took a seat in the auditorium, waiting for the presentation to begin. When the time came, President Mike announced the end of the written exams and instructed everyone to change and board the bus to the exam grounds. Izuku quickly changed into a black tank top and teal sweatpants, securing his speaker around his neck. On the bus, he closed his eyes, mentally preparing for the challenge ahead. When they arrived, he eagerly awaited the signal to start. President Mike urged the students to go without a countdown, and Izuku took off, sprinting ahead of the others, feeling exhilarated. At the testing ground, he dashed ahead, determined to gain an advantage. Spotting a group of 6 robots, he recalled his father's advice from the written exam about immobilizing as many robots as possible while avoiding the zero-pointer. Confident, he approached the robots and shouted a simple command, causing them to freeze in place. He repeated this until he was sure he had immobilized all he could see. As he surveyed the area, he noticed the dark green robots, some frozen with a purple glow from his quirk. Checking his watch, he saw there were only 2 minutes left. Just then, he felt a rumble beneath him and turned to see the massive zero-pointer approaching. Others were fleeing, but Izuku's attention was drawn to a girl trapped under fallen rubble. Without hesitation, he sprang into action. He attempted to use his quirk on the giant robot, but it was ineffective. Remembering he had another ability, he took a deep breath and leaped into the air. Pain shot through his legs as he landed, but he focused on the task at hand. Aiming for the robot's head, he shouted his signature move, Detroit's Smash. His fist connected with the machine's head, causing it to stagger backward. However, his victory was short-lived as he realized he was falling back to the ground. He braced himself for impact, closing his eyes as he prepared for the landing. Just before he hit the ground, the girl he saved brushed his shoulder. Tentatively, he opened his eyes to see that, for the second time that day, his nose was inches from the ground. Just as he sighed in relief, the girl released whatever she had caught him with, and he hit the ground. He got up, rubbing his nose and asking if she was okay, remembering that she had been trapped under some rubble. She replied that she was fine, thanks to him. Determined to help, he introduced himself as Izuku Aizawa and began lifting rocks off her legs. "I'm Ochako Uraraka," she said, finally managing to pull herself free from the stones that had imprisoned her. Suddenly, a loud voice announced that the test was over, and everyone was free to head home, with results to follow in a few weeks. As Izuku began to walk away, Uraraka called out to him, asking if they could exchange numbers to stay in touch about their results. He smiled and returned to her, agreeing that he would love to exchange numbers. They shared their contact information and went their separate ways, each wearing a small smile. A week after the exams, at 3:57 a.m. in the Shinso residence, Hitoshi sat awake, staring at his phone, waiting for someone to text him. Sleep eluded him, as it often did, and he reflected on the entrance exams for what felt like the millionth time. In his mind, he recalled the day of the practical exam, feeling certain he had failed. His quirk had been incompatible with the tests, leaving him feeling powerless. The only glimmer of hope had come from saving someone from the zero-pointer. He had studied hard for weeks and was confident he had done well on the written portion. As he walked, lost in thought, a small boy with deep green hair bumped into him. The boy apologized profusely, and Hitoshi recognized him as the kid from earlier. They exchanged pleasantries, and the boy, Izuku, asked how Hitoshi felt he did on the exam. Hitoshi felt a mix of disbelief and gratitude at the boy's concern, admitting that he hadn't done well in the practical. Izuku's expression turned sympathetic, but then he brightened, reminding Hitoshi that there was still a chance to get into the hero course. He explained that no one in his test group had taken out more than 2 robots, meaning the average score was low. If Hitoshi had done well on the written portion, he might still have a chance. Hitoshi admired Izuku's optimism, wishing he could share that perspective. They exchanged numbers before parting ways, and Hitoshi couldn't shake the feeling that Izuku was an unusual but refreshing person. Back in the present, Hitoshi scrolled through his contacts, landing on Izuku's name. He hesitated, wondering if he should reach out. Doubts crept in. Perhaps Izuku was asleep, or maybe he had only been nice out of pity. Ultimately, Hitoshi decided against calling, setting his phone down and staring at the ceiling, contemplating his future at UA. He felt hopeless, burdened by the belief that he was destined to be a villain, a notion that had followed him throughout his life. Eventually, he fell asleep, his features still troubled, and a single tear slipped down his cheek as he drifted into a restless slumber. 2 weeks later, 2:25 p.m. Izawa residence. Izuku had been left home alone for the day because his fathers had to go into work to prepare their classrooms. There was still no word on Izuku's acceptance, but he knew he had at least passed. He was scrolling through his news feed when a notification popped up at the top of his phone. Tapping it, realized that Shinso had texted him. Hitoshi asked Izuku what was up, teasing him about calling him by his first name. Izuku shrugged it off, saying he didn't know why he did. Hitoshi then mentioned that if Izuku was going to call him by his first name, he would do the same. Izuku agreed, and they continued to chat about their potential class placements. Hitoshi expressed doubt about being in the same class, while Izuku hoped they would be together. He shared that his fathers had said acceptance letters would arrive around 4 that day. Hitoshi was surprised to learn that Izuku's fathers worked at UA and were pro-heroes. Izuku laughed at Hitoshi's excitement and shared that his dads were Eraserhead and Present Mike. Hitoshi was thrilled by this revelation and said he would talk to Izuku later when his mom called. Izuku smiled at his phone, feeling a warm glow. He had made a friend even before school started. After turning on a random movie, he began to drift off to sleep, a smile on his lips as he closed his eyes. 3:30 p.m. UA High School, Principal's Office. Izawa was scratching the back of his neck nervously, wondering what Nizu wanted with them. Mike, as always, was overly enthusiastic, encouraging Izawa to find out. Izawa asked if Mike ever quieted down, to which Mike cheerfully replied that he did not. Once they approached Nizu's door, Izawa knocked lightly. Nizu invited them in, and the 2 men entered the large room to see the small creature sipping tea. Nizu informed them that he had called them to discuss their son's application results. Mike was eager to know, while Izawa responded simply. Nizu happily announced that Izuku had been accepted into the UA Hero course, Class 1A. Mike cheered loudly, while Izawa, though surprised, was pleased. Nizu suggested they get home before the acceptance letters arrived. The 2 men thanked Nizu and exited the room. 3:58 p.m. Izawa residence. As they entered their home, Izawa playfully scolded Hizashi for being annoying. Hizashi, pretending not to hear, was startled when Izawa pointed out their sleeping son on the couch. They approached Izuku, pulling out their phones to capture the moment. Izawa snapped pictures, while Hizashi accidentally woke Izuku with the flash. Izuku groggily greeted them, rubbing his eyes. He checked the time and suddenly shot up from the couch, racing to the front door. Within moments, he returned, holding a white letter with a red wax seal, exclaiming that it had arrived. Izawa encouraged him to open it, already knowing the contents. Hizashi hovered over Izuku's shoulder, eager to see. Izuku tore open the envelope and read the letter quickly. His eyes widened with excitement, and he jumped up again, shouting that he had gotten into Class 1. Tears of joy streamed down his freckled cheeks. Izawa, breaking his usual stoic demeanor, embraced his son tightly, inviting Hizashi to join them. After a heartfelt moment, Izawa reminded Izuku that while he had worked hard to reach this point, the journey ahead would be challenging. He advised Izuku to prepare for the next 3 years, which would demand even more effort and determination. Even though this was just a bonus, it was still important to the story. It provided a rundown of Izuku's new hero costume. The author apologized in advance for their poor drawing skills. 2 days later, 10:45 p.m. Izawa residence. Izuku lay awake in his bed, staring at the blank, white ceiling above him. Thoughts raced through his mind. He should be a happy kid, right? To everyone else, he appeared to be. They had no idea that inside, he felt like he was crumbling. Genuine smiles were rare for him. Although he had told his fathers that the nightmares had stopped, they had only worsened. Almost every night he heard his mother's desperate cries. He felt as though he was being chased and engulfed by the haunting blue flames. The memories tormented him, leaving him sobbing into his knees, careful not to wake his slumbering fathers. He had grown terrified of even the thought of sleep. Izuku got up and went to the bathroom, looking in the mirror at his reflection. His long hair reached his shoulders, and dark circles marked his eyes, highlighting his imperfections. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing numerous thin lines etched into his skin. Some were old, others scabbed over, but many were fresh. As he opened the cabinet under the sink, he reached for the cool metal of his razor. He pulled it out, contemplating whether to use it again. Anxiety bubbled inside him, and he felt an overwhelming urge to release it. He looked down at his arm, now marked with new lines, each one a reminder of his struggle. After placing the blade back in its hiding spot, he rinsed his arm and rolled his sleeve back down. When he returned to his room, he collapsed onto his bed. Picking up his phone, he noticed a new text from Hitoshi. Hitoshi reached out, expressing concern for Izuku's well-being. Despite his friend's worry, Izuku felt reluctant to share everything that was happening. He feared that Hitoshi would think he was crazy or would distance himself. Just as he began to worry more, his phone vibrated again. Hitoshi was attempting to video call him. Reluctantly, Izuku answered the call, greeted by the worried face of his friend. Hitoshi pressed him for answers, sensing something was wrong. Izuku struggled to suppress his tears, feeling overwhelmed. Hitoshi reassured him that he was always there for him, urging him to share what was troubling him. Izuku finally admitted to doing something he regretted, unable to hold back his tears any longer. He confessed that he had harmed himself, feeling the weight of his pain. Hitoshi's expression shifted from concern to sadness. He couldn't understand why he hadn't noticed Izuku's struggles sooner. Izuku explained the trauma of losing his mother in a fire, the nightmares that plagued him, and the stress that felt insurmountable. He expressed feelings of weakness and helplessness. Hitoshi, now in tears, felt a deep sorrow for his friend. He wanted to help but felt helpless himself. He urged Izuku to talk to his parents, but Izuku panicked at the suggestion, pleading not to be forced into that. Hitoshi reassured him that he didn't have to tell them just yet, trying to calm him down. Surprisingly, it worked. The two friends stayed on the phone until Izuku eventually fell asleep, tears still staining his cheeks. The following day, Izuku sat on the sofa in the living room of his family's house. As he scrolled through his phone, trying to find something interesting to occupy his mind, he attempted to ignore the throbbing pain in his arm. Just as he was about to tap on an article about the up-and-coming hero, Kamui Woods, his phone buzzed with a new message from Hitoshi. Hitoshi greeted Izuku and asked how he was doing. Izuku replied that he was feeling better, and Hitoshi expressed his gladness. Hitoshi then inquired about Izuku's class placement, to which Izuku proudly announced that he was in Class 1A of the Hero course. Hitoshi shared that he had been placed in Class 1C for General Studies, which Izuku found unfortunate. Hitoshi mentioned he had already arranged a meeting with the principal for the first day of school. When Izuku asked about Hitoshi's quirk, Hitoshi explained that it was called brainwash, allowing him to control someone if they answered his questions. Izuku found it fascinating, noting that his own quirk, which could freeze anything by saying the word, stop, could also be seen as villainous. They continued to chat, and Izuku felt a sense of connection growing between them. After that day, Hitoshi and Izuku began talking almost every day. Regardless of their moods, they always ended their conversations with smiles. Although Izuku was still struggling internally, he did his best to conceal his feelings from Hitoshi. On the first day of school, the bell rang, signaling the start of the first class. The students were still chatting when a peculiar figure emerged from a sleeping bag, startling everyone except for Izuku. The man, who introduced himself as Eraserhead, instructed the students to address him as Mr. Aizawa. He began taking roll call, and when he reached Izuku's name, he looked at his son with a mischievous grin. Izuku, feeling embarrassed, responded quietly, drawing the attention of his classmates. After completing roll call, Mr. Aizawa announced that instead of an orientation meeting, they would be conducting a quirk fitness test. The class cheered at the news, especially Mina Ishido, who exclaimed that it would be fun. Mr. Aizawa, however, warned them that the student with the lowest score would face expulsion, which caused a mix of excitement and apprehension among the students. He instructed them to put on their gear and meet him outside, leaving Izuku to reflect on his father's usual complaints about expulsion paperwork. Meanwhile, in Principal Nizu's office, Hitoshi stood before the small mammal, expressing his desire to join the hero course. Nizu informed him that Mr. Aizawa had agreed to let him into Class 1A if he could prove his quirk was strong enough. To that end, Nizu arranged a practice fight between Hitoshi and the top 3 students from the fitness test. Hitoshi felt a surge of hope at the opportunity to join the hero course. Determined, Hitoshi raced out of the principal's office, eager to gather information about his potential classmates. Upon reaching the training ground, he observed the students, most of whom appeared ordinary, except for one Izuku Aizawa. Hitoshi noticed that Izuku wore gloves that covered his arms and was about to ask him about it when Mr. Aizawa approached him. Mr. Aizawa, in his usual monotone voice, asked if he could help. Hitoshi introduced himself and nervously explained his purpose. Mr. Aizawa coldly gestured to the other students, indicating that Hitoshi should explain his intentions to them. Hitoshi felt the pressure of being in the spotlight but knew he had to step up and share his goal of joining their class through a series of one-on-one fights against the top scorers. If he won 2 of the 3 fights, he would be joining their class. Aizawa confirmed this, enjoying the shocked expressions on his students' faces. Shinso, if he won the fights, would replace the lowest scoring student. With that in mind, the tests began. The tests ran smoothly for all the students, except for Mineta. Izuku managed to score at the top in all the tests, except for the ball throwing, where Uraraka excelled for obvious reasons. Once all the tests were completed, Mr. Aizawa projected the scores. Aizawa, Izuku, Yairozu Moma, Todoroki Shoto. Mineta, Minor. Mineta, you are expelled effective immediately. Call your parents and leave. The whole class fell silent, so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Now for the fights. You may use any means necessary to win. To win, you either have to immobilize your opponent or force them to leave the arena. Aizawa, you're up first. Yayorozu and Todoroki, you two aren't allowed to watch the fight. As for the rest of you, do not mention anything about the fight to them until they have completed theirs. Is that understood? Yes, sir. The whole class shouted in unison, except for a sniveling Mineta. The class made its way over to a large gymnasium where Cementos was building a small arena, about 20 feet wide and 30 feet long. There was a separate room for Todoroki and Yayorozu to wait in. Izuku and Hitoshi stepped onto the arena once instructed. At that moment, they regretted revealing their quirks to each other. Throwing one glove aside, Izuku donned a determined expression that unnerved Hitoshi. He thought about the significance of Izuku keeping one glove on. Just then he noticed the speaker on the glove's hand. All he had to do was stay out of Izuku's range and get him to answer. Go! Aizawa shouted, and the two began their fight. Izuku sent multiple attacks in Hitoshi's direction, but none of his sound waves hit. Hitoshi marveled at Izuku's skill, wondering how he was so good at dodging. Izuku remained silent, aware of Hitoshi's strategy. He unleashed another barrage of attacks, which Hitoshi dodged with great difficulty. Soon, Hitoshi found himself on his stomach on the floor. He quickly jumped up and sprinted closer to Izuku. You aren't going easy on me, are you? Hitoshi asked, but his question was met with silence. He thought to himself how skilled Izuku was. At this point, Hitoshi decided to abandon his quirk and rely on pure force. He closed the distance between them in an instant and attempted to sweep Izuku's legs. Izuku couldn't react quickly enough and landed flat on his back. Hitoshi held Izuku's gloved hand down, but before he could process what was happening, Izuku kicked him off and pinned him down. His long green hair fell around his face, and sweat dripped from his nose. Hitoshi felt certain he was going to lose, but he had one more trick up his sleeve. He leaned closer to Izuku and whispered, "Hey Izu, did you know that I have a crush on you?" He knew this would catch Izuku off guard. Hitoshi knew he would deeply regret his actions later, but for now he was focused on getting into this class. He thought he had caught Izuku off guard when he instructed him to walk out of the arena. Izuku complied, his expression completely blank, his usually vibrant eyes now dull and gray. Mr. Aizawa announced that Shinso had won, slightly surprised by the outcome. Hitoshi released his hold on Izuku and walked out of the arena to get a drink and prepare for his next match. He easily defeated Yaoyorozu, and since it was his second win, he wouldn't have to face Todoroki. Upon witnessing Hitoshi's victory, Izuku couldn't contain his excitement. He rushed up to the taller boy and threw his arms around him, exclaiming his joy. Hitoshi, amused, hugged the smaller boy back and noted the nickname. Izuku quickly apologized and broke the hug, but Hitoshi reassured him that he liked it. Their teacher's voice cut through the moment, reminding them to return to the classroom. Everyone had almost forgotten about Mr. Aizawa's presence, and they hurried along, eager to avoid his displeasure. Once they reached the classroom, Mr. Aizawa showed Hitoshi his seat, which happened to be behind the younger Aizawa. He instructed the class to do whatever they wanted for the rest of the day, just not to wake him up. The students took this as an opportunity to mingle and get to know each other, while Hitoshi, unlike his classmates, decided to catch up on some sleep. Just as he was about to lay his head down, he noticed Izuku approaching him. Hitoshi thought to himself that sleep would have to wait. Izuku hesitantly approached, stuttering as he asked if they could talk about earlier. Hitoshi found him kind of cute when he stuttered and agreed to the conversation. Izuku began to ramble, questioning whether Hitoshi meant what he had said during their match. Hitoshi interrupted, acknowledging that he had indeed intended to catch Izuku off guard. However, he also confessed that he genuinely liked him. Izuku's face turned a deep shade of red, and he was taken aback. He stammered that it was fine if Hitoshi didn't feel the same way, but he quickly straightened up and declared that he liked Hitoshi back. He had thought Hitoshi was straight and had hesitated to express his feelings. Hitoshi was surprised and asked if Izuku was serious. The two fell into an awkward silence until Hitoshi broke it, suggesting they hang out after school. Izuku eagerly agreed, promising to inform Mr. Aizawa first. For both boys, the day seemed to drag on. It was the first day, and most students were goofing off, while others, like Ida, tried to maintain some order. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bell rang, signaling the end of the day. Hitoshi made his way to the front gate to wait for Izuku. Izuku gently shook the giant caterpillar, calling out to his father. The elder Aizawa glared at the interruption but softened upon realizing it was his son. Izuku hesitated before asking if he could hang out with Hitoshi for a while. Hitoshi's name brought a grin to his father's face. He agreed, reminding Izuku to be home before 8 and not to do anything too reckless. Grateful, Izuku dashed off before his father could say anything more. As he approached the gate, he spotted Hitoshi waiting for him. Izuku waved, and Hitoshi turned, his usual serious expression softening into a light smile. Rubbing the back of his neck, Hitoshi greeted him, and they began walking down the sidewalk. Hitoshi suggested they stop by Izuku's place so he could change, but Izuku quickly rejected the idea, fearing his dad's would embarrass him. Hitoshi chuckled and offered to lend Izuku some of his clothes, noting that wearing a uniform on a date wouldn't be ideal. The mention of a date caught Izuku off guard, and he panicked, worrying that Hitoshi might not see it that way. However, Hitoshi reassured him that he had some old pants that would fit. When they arrived at Hitoshi's house, he led Izuku inside, mentioning that his parents were not home yet. In Hitoshi's room, he handed Izuku a t-shirt and joggers that seemed a bit small. Izuku changed in the bathroom, folding his uniform neatly before rejoining Hitoshi. Hitoshi's gaze traveled over Izuku's arm, where red lines marred his skin. Izuku noticed and instinctively tried to hide it, but Hitoshi gently grasped his hand, urging him to come with him. In the bathroom, Hitoshi lifted Izuku onto the counter and rummaged through the medicine cabinet. He asked if Izuku had taken care of his arm since their last conversation, and Izuku admitted he hadn't. Hitoshi prepared to clean the cuts, warning Izuku that it might sting. As he dabbed the cotton ball against Izuku's arm, he was careful, especially around the newer cuts, which elicited soft hisses from Izuku. After tending to the wounds, Hitoshi wrapped Izuku's arm in bandages and made him promise to try to stop hurting himself. Izuku, on the verge of tears, nodded, and Hitoshi pulled him into a comforting hug, feeling the warmth of Izuku's tears on his shirt. Once Izuku calmed down, they decided to visit a small cafe, hoping to avoid large crowds. They found a cozy table by a window. A tall blonde waitress approached them, looking about their age, and asked for their orders. Izuku requested a medium chai tea latte, while Hitoshi, caught off guard by the waitress's flirty demeanor, ordered a large black coffee. The waitress leaned closer to Hitoshi, complimenting him and winking, which made him uncomfortable. When she returned with their drinks, Izuku, feeling protective, asked the waitress to stop flirting with Hitoshi. Surprised, she inquired if Hitoshi was Izuku's boyfriend. Izuku, feeling a surge of confidence, declared that he was, leaving both Hitoshi and the waitress baffled. The waitress, blushing, handed them the check and hurried away, embarrassed. Izuku reflected on the encounter, and Hitoshi, noticing his discomfort, apologized. Izuku reassured him that it wasn't his fault. Hitoshi then shyly asked if he could call Izuku his boyfriend from now on. Izuku enthusiastically agreed and hugged Hitoshi tightly, surprising him with his warmth and affection. After finishing their drinks, they paid and decided to head back to Hitoshi's place to watch a movie, knowing they had a few hours before Izuku needed to return home. Hitoshi reassured him that his parents would be out until after 8. Curious about what to watch, Hitoshi asked Izuku for his preference, but Izuku suggested Hitoshi choose instead, hopping onto the bed with excitement. Hitoshi smiled already, formulating a plan for a movie that would make their time together memorable. Iza didn't seem like the type to watch horror movies very often, so he chose the film It. He inserted the disc into the DVD player and settled onto his bed next to his boyfriend. Hitoshi, with a smirk, teased him about the movie choice. When the title appeared on the screen, Izuku's eyes widened in surprise. Hitoshi playfully questioned if Izuku was scared of the film. Izuku hesitated, trying to mask his fear. As the movie progressed, Izuku managed to stay composed until a sudden jump scare occurred, causing him to squeak and leap into Hitoshi's arms. Hitoshi felt the smaller boy trembling but noticed that his gaze remained fixed on the TV, so he assumed Izuku was all right. However, another jump scare made Izuku bury his head in Hitoshi's chest, shaking uncontrollably. Concerned, Hitoshi felt his shirt dampen with Izuku's tears. He quickly turned off the movie and focused on the quaking boy in his embrace. He spoke soothingly, reassuring Izuku that it was just a movie and there was no need to be scared. Hitoshi wrapped his arms around him and gently stroked his back until Izuku's shaking subsided and his tears dried. Hitoshi looked down to check on him. Izuku expressed his gratitude, thanking Hitoshi for being there. Hitoshi apologized for making him watch the movie, and Izuku playfully scolded him, insisting he shouldn't do it again. After a few minutes of silent cuddling, Izuku decided it was time to head home. He changed back into his uniform and returned Hitoshi's clothes. The two walked down the sidewalk in comfortable silence. Hitoshi noticed Izuku shivering and, without a word, removed his sweatshirt and tossed it to him. Izuku looked up in surprise before putting it on, thanking Hitoshi for the gesture. Hitoshi replied that he had a good time, and Izuku agreed, adding a humorous remark about a rude waitress. Laughter filled the air, and Izuku looked at Hitoshi, puzzled by his partner's amusement. Hitoshi explained that he was surprised to hear Izuku swear. Before long, they arrived at the Aizawa's house to say their goodbyes. Hitoshi turned to leave, but Izuku called him back, reminding him about the sweater. Hitoshi simply told him to keep it and walked away with a contented smile. Izuku unlocked the door to his house with the spare key his parents had given him. Upon entering, he was greeted by both of his fathers, who wore mischievous grins. They inquired about the sweater, and Izuku immediately regretted not taking it off before coming inside. His father Shota suggested he tell them about Hitoshi, and Izuku asked if he could sit down first. They moved to the living room, where Izuku shared details about Hitoshi, describing him as sweet and caring, and expressing how cute he found him, especially when he smiled. His father's smiles widened with each word. They playfully teased Izuku about having a crush, and he shyly confirmed that Hitoshi was indeed his boyfriend. As he recounted their date at the cafe, he omitted the very beginning. After explaining why he wore the oversized hoodie, Izuku finally received permission to retreat to his room. Once inside, he changed out of his uniform into shorts and a t-shirt, pulling Hitoshi's hoodie over his outfit. Lying on his bed, he took a deep breath, appreciating the comforting scent of his boyfriend's hoodie. It enveloped him in warmth, and he slowly drifted off to sleep, comforted by the familiar fragrance. 2 weeks later, at UA High School, everyone in Class 1A was aware that Aizawa and Shinso were dating. Their affection for each other was evident in their blushing and nervous giggles. As they walked to school together, Hitoshi draped his arm over Izuku's shoulders while Izuku rambled about something random. Hitoshi smiled down at him, feeling a sense of happiness. At the entrance exams, Hitoshi had no intention of making friends until he met Izuku. There was something about the smaller boy that melted his heart, and he wanted to ensure Izuku's happiness. He was eager to learn everything about him, his personality, life, likes, and dislikes. Soon, they found themselves in class, waiting for the lesson to begin. Mr. Aizawa entered and mentioned selecting a class representative, causing the class to erupt in chatter. With a single glare, he silenced them, and the students settled into their seats. "I don't care how you do it, but figure it out before the end of class and do it quietly," the teacher said before returning to his usual state of indifference. Ida suggested that they should have a vote, and everyone turned their attention to him as he made a chopping motion with his hand. Others chimed in, agreeing that it was a great idea, and soon they were all eager to get it over with. After Ida explained the details, the class cast their votes. When the results were in, Ida announced that Aizawa was the class representative and Yaoyorozu was the vice representative. Izuku felt uneasy about his new role. He disliked being in the spotlight. The class continued to chatter until the lunch bell rang, prompting everyone to head to the lunchroom. They expected the usual uneventful lunch, but were startled when an alarm blared, instructing them to evacuate the building. In seconds, the halls filled with panicked students rushing to escape. Izuku found himself pressed against a window, separated from Shinso. Looking outside, he realized it was just the press. He needed to find a way to quell the panic. Without his gear, he couldn't use his quirk effectively. As he scanned the area for help, he spotted Ida soaring through the air, albeit clumsily. "Everyone calm down. It's just the press. Please exit the building in an orderly and calm fashion." Ida's voice cut through the chaos, and the students began to settle down, reassured that it was merely the press. Meanwhile, in the League of Villains headquarters, Kirujiri stepped through a portal, presenting the necessary paperwork to Tamura Shigaraki. "Sure, whatever," Tamura replied, uninterested. After a week of careful planning, the villains were ready to execute their plan, capturing the son of Eraserhead. At 8 a.m. in UA High School's Class 1A, Eraserhead managed to calm his students before announcing that they would be doing rescue training at the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, known as the USJ. The students rushed to put on their hero costumes and gathered at the front gates. Ida took charge, urging everyone to board the bus in an orderly manner. After the earlier incident, Izuku decided to let Ida take over as class representative, recognizing his capability. The bus ride to the training grounds was quiet, with most students zoning out as 13 explained the uses of the USJ. When they entered the building, they were awed by its grandeur. "Now, each of you," Mr. Aizawa began, but was interrupted by a shadow looming over him. He turned to see villains emerging from a purple mist. "Cool. They even have fake villains," Kirishima exclaimed, excited. "Students, stay back. These villains are not fake," 13 warned, her voice filled with urgency. The gravity of the situation dawned on the students. The purple mist approached, declaring, "We are here for Izuku Aizawa, Katsuki Bakugu, and Hitoshi Shinso. Surrender them willingly, or we will take them by force." Suddenly, a flash of black and red darted overhead as Bakugu and Kirishima lunged at the mist. "You've made your choice," the mist replied, enveloping the students and separating them into small groups. Aizawa, Shinso, and Bakugu found themselves facing the leader of the villains. "Hello, you three," the man with bluish-silver hair and white hands said. "I've done a lot of research on you. I know all about your quirks and how to avoid them." In an instant, he lunged for Izuku, disintegrating his speakers but causing no physical harm. Bakugu charged at the man but was intercepted by a powerful punch from a tall, muscular creature resembling a bird, with an exposed brain. "This is my Nomu. Its only jobs are to protect me and defeat All Might," the villain laughed maniacally. Shinso realized that if the villain already understood their quirks, using his would only put others at risk. Izuku knew that attempting to use his quirk without his speakers would only lead to disaster. "Izuku!" All of their attention shifted to Eraserhead, who sprinted toward his son. "Dad, stay back!" Izuku shouted, desperate not to activate his quirk. But Eraserhead continued forward, only to be struck down by Nomu, which pinned him down with ease. "Dad!" Izuku cried out in fear, trying to rush toward him, but Shinso held him back. Despite his struggles, Hitoshi kept a firm grip on him. "You know, I think you're really cool, Eraserhead," the handman said as he approached the hero. Just then, Nomu slammed Eraserhead's face into the ground. "Dad, no!" Izuku thrashed in Hitoshi's arms, tears streaming down his face. He couldn't bear the thought of losing another parent. "Please, Hito. Let me go. I have to help him." "It won't do any good, Aizu," Hitoshi replied, knowing his words fell on deaf ears as he tightened his hold. Nomu continued to overpower Eraserhead, but then All Might burst through the door, his usual smile replaced by a fierce glare. "Do not fear, students, for I am here." In a single bound, he confronted Nomu, knocking it back several feet. "Kurugiri, get us out of here," the handman shouted, seizing the distraction to capture his target. A purple portal enveloped Tamura Shigaraki, Nomu, and Izuku, leaving Hitoshi grasping at thin air. "Demon IT!" Hitoshi shouted, falling to his knees, filled with frustration and despair. Katsuki lay on the ground, shocked and in pain, realizing they had taken Deku. Eraserhead lay unconscious, bleeding on the floor, while All Might stood horrified at the unfolding events. All the other students were in shock, wondering what had just happened. The next day, 7:51 a.m. League of Villains headquarters, a bedroom. Izuku woke up in a bed that was not his own. As he tried to move, a throbbing pain shot through his head. He reached to touch it but found himself restrained by ancient hypophysis connecting him to the bed. Panic set in as he attempted to use his quirk to break free, but it was no use. His abilities were being suppressed. He thrashed around, trying to escape his bindings, but they held firm. He recognized the voice that spoke next. "I see you're awake." It was the man from the day before. "I asked the master what I should do with you. He said to do whatever I wish, and it would be a shame to turn someone as pretty as you into a Nomu. So I decided to make you my pet until you can be of any other use to us." "Why me?" Izuku asked, struggling to keep the fear from his voice. "Because I'm interested in your quirk. I want to use it, but first I need to teach you your place." Izuku was taken aback by the villain's willingness to answer his questions, but before he could think further, he felt the man looming over him. "Let's start the lesson," the man said with a sinister tone. He began to disintegrate Izuku's clothes, exposing his muscles. The villain's hand glided over Izuku's chest and up to his jaw, gripping it tightly. He forced Izuku to look at him before their lips collided. Izuku resisted, keeping his lips tightly shut. This was not how he wanted his first kiss to be. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his bottom lip as the man bit down, and Izuku cried out. The man continued his actions, and Izuku felt a wave of dread wash over him. "Please, no," he begged, realizing the gravity of the situation. The man threatened him, and Izuku understood the seriousness of his words. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the pain. The man yanked on his hair, causing Izuku to whimper. He fought to remain still, not wanting to provoke him further. After what felt like an eternity, the man finally left, leaving Izuku alone with his thoughts and a single blanket. He cried for what felt like hours. At the same time, UA High School, a conference room. All of the UA teachers gathered around a table, with Nizu at the head. "I assume you all know why you're here," he said, his voice devoid of its usual cheer. "We were attacked yesterday by the League of Villains, and they escaped with one of our students. Until we find and rescue him, the recovery of Izuku Aizawa is to be your top priority. We have multiple hero agencies working alongside us. I expect each of you to work diligently to find this boy." The teachers looked distraught, but 3 in particular were in a state of despair. Present Mike had not stopped crying since the previous night. Eraserhead was covered in bandages and unable to assist, while All Might's eyes had lost their usual sparkle. After an hour of strategizing, the teachers were dismissed, each assigned a task. Present Mike and Eraserhead returned home to an empty house, void of joy. They sat on the sofa, tears streaming down their faces. "Hisashi, what are we going to do?" "We're going to find him. This is all my fault. I was right there. If I had just listened when he told me to stay back." His voice broke with sobs. "You can't blame yourself, Sho. I would have done the same thing." He pulled his husband closer, allowing him to cry into his chest. "Zashi, what if he doesn't?" "Don't say that. We will get him back. He's strong. I know he can pull through." "I'm so sorry." Shota sobbed into Hisashi's chest, unsure of who he was apologizing to, whether it was Hisashi or Izuku. They sat in silence, the only sound being Shota's quiet sobs. A week later, 12:09 p.m. League of Villains headquarters, a bedroom. The days of torment from Tamura Shigaraki continued relentlessly. Izuku was confined to his bedroom, allowed to leave only for bathroom breaks. He had no clothes, as Tamura would disintegrate them by the end of the day, so when he did leave his room, he wrapped himself tightly in a blanket. Tamura permitted him to roam the room when he wasn't present, but the HNDCFFS remained. Izuku could hardly stand, let alone walk. Laying on his bed, staring at the ceiling, he was on the verge of sleep when Tamura burst through the door, causing Izuku to tumble out of bed and onto the floor. "Please, no," he pleaded, fear gripping him. "You're cute when you beg. Too bad it won't get you anywhere." He yanked Izuku up by his hair and pushed him back onto the bed. Izuku shut his eyes tightly as tears streamed down his face, bracing himself for the inevitable. The day before, 9 a.m. UA High School, a conference room. Principal Nizu addressed a gathering of about 20 pro heroes. "I have called you all here today to discuss the rescue of Izuku Aizawa. We have located where we believe the boy is being held. Each of you has been given a folder containing a document outlining your task. I expect you to put all your effort into memorizing it." They would meet outside the location at noon the following day. Once everyone was gathered, they would launch their attack at 12:10 p.m. The crowd responded in unison, acknowledging the plan, and then most of them departed. However, Shota Aizawa remained behind. He inquired about who would be responsible for the actual rescue. The principal informed him that it would be Aizawa himself, noting that his folder was empty. Aizawa expressed his concerns, mentioning that Izuku had not seen him since the incident at USJ and might not recognize him due to his bandages. The principal considered this for a moment before asking if Aizawa had someone else in mind for the task. Aizawa took a moment to think and then confirmed that he did. The principal guessed that Aizawa was referring to Shinso. Aizawa nodded in agreement. The principal reminded him that he would need to seek permission from Shinso's parents, emphasizing that the boy should not engage in combat unless absolutely necessary. Aizawa acknowledged this instruction. With that settled, the scene shifted to the present time, where it was now 12:10 p.m. at the League of Villains headquarters, specifically in a bedroom. Tamura was on top of Izuku when he heard a crash outside. He let out a small sound of annoyance, thinking it was just some of the other villains causing trouble. He continued to kiss Izuku's body, making his way up to the boy's mouth, where he pressed their lips together. Izuku had given up on resisting and felt tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the situation and wishing for it all to end. Just as Tamura was about to escalate things further, someone burst through the door, looking frantic. The newcomer was clearly furious. Tamura complied with the command to get off the bed. At the sound of the familiar voice, Izuku cracked his eyes open and saw his purple-haired hero standing there. Hitoshi rushed to Izuku's side, tears streaming down his face as he wrapped him in a blanket. He pulled the smaller boy into a tight embrace and then asked if he could walk. Izuku attempted to stand but fell almost instantly, only to be caught in Hitoshi's arms. Hitoshi asked if it was okay to carry him, and Izuku nodded, allowing himself to be lifted. As they exited the room, Izuku saw the chaos unfolding outside. There were at least 20 heroes engaged in battle with villains. Present Mike spotted them and shouted for everyone to fall back, signaling that they had Izuku. Slowly, the heroes retreated, and the villains were enveloped by a purple mist. Izuku heard the blaring sirens of an ambulance as Hitoshi carefully placed him on a waiting stretcher. Just as Hitoshi turned to leave, he felt a weak tug on his sleeve. Izuku looked at him with fear in his eyes, pleading for him not to leave. Hitoshi recognized the panic in Izuku's expression and assured him that he would stay by his side. They lifted the stretcher into the ambulance, where Present Mike was trying to maintain his composure. A paramedic informed Present Mike that they would put Izuku to sleep to prevent his heart rate from rising due to stress. The rest of the ride to the hospital was silent, save for the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the sounds of the sirens. Upon arriving at the hospital, Izuku was whisked away by a team of doctors, leaving Hitoshi and Hizashi alone to wait for news about his condition. Hizashi finally let his emotions surface, crying uncontrollably at the thought of what Izuku must have endured. Hitoshi sat beside him, gently rubbing circles on his back to offer comfort. Soon, a worried Shota arrived and sat between them, wrapping a bandaged arm around each as they waited anxiously to see Izuku. Later that day, a doctor emerged from the swinging doors with a concerned expression. The three men looked up, instantly alert. The doctor led them down a series of halls and paused outside a room, indicating that most of Izuku's injuries were minor and would not have lasting effects. However, there was clear evidence of trauma, and he might be jumpy for a while, possibly experiencing some form of PTSD. The doctor also mentioned that Izuku's arms bore scars from self-harm, which neither Hizashi nor Shota had known about, though they suspected Hitoshi did. As they entered the room, they found Izuku lying unconscious in a hospital bed, bandaged and vulnerable. Shota felt a wave of guilt wash over him for not being there during the initial rescue. Hizashi's voice was softer than usual as he called out to Izuku, who slowly began to wake up, confusion evident on his face. When Izuku finally recognized his surroundings, he expressed how he felt as if he had been hit by a bus, his voice raspy from the ordeal. He was surprised to hear his own voice and remembered that his quirk relied on him speaking. Hitoshi, holding Izuku's hand, was filled with a mix of disappointment, anger, and sadness. He expressed his regret for not being able to protect Izuku, tears streaming down his face. Izuku reassured him that he was there now, but Hitoshi hesitated to hug him when he noticed Izuku flinch in fear. Izuku closed his eyes, trying to calm himself, and apologized for his reaction. Hitoshi reassured him that it wasn't his fault and that he should have known better. As Izuku fiddled with the hem of his blanket, he noticed his father's staring at his arms. He felt shame wash over him as he acknowledged that they knew about his scars. Shota asked why he had resorted to self-harm, and Izuku explained that he just wanted the pain to stop. Tears flowed down his face as he admitted he hadn't wanted to worry them. Shota emphasized that they would always worry about him, no matter what, because he was their son. Izuku sobbed, feeling the weight of their concern and love. All anyone in that room wanted to do was hug Izuku and reassure him that everything would be alright, but they knew it could trigger him again. Hizashi made every effort to keep his voice low and calm as he asked if they could give Izuku a hug. Izuku nodded timidly, feeling all three pairs of arms wrap him in a warm embrace. Eventually, he melted into the hug and let his tears flow freely. Hitoshi then asked Izuku to promise him something. Izuku responded that he would do anything, and Hitoshi urged him to promise that he would stop whatever was troubling him. With a shaky voice, Izuku agreed, and Hitoshi thanked him. The next day, at 11 a.m. in a hospital, the doctors had cleared Izuku to go home the night before. He, along with his fathers and Hitoshi, made their way to the front exit. Izuku was in a wheelchair, being pushed by Hitoshi since he still couldn't walk. The doctors advised him to rest for the time being and informed him that he wasn't allowed to return to school for a week. When they approached the car, Hitoshi carefully lifted Izuku into the vehicle and placed the wheelchair in the trunk. Once Hitoshi took his seat, Izuku grabbed his hand and held it the entire way home. Hisashi and Shota decided to alternate taking time off work to care for their son. Hitoshi was also granted a week off from school due to his involvement in the effort to rescue Izuku, as the principal believed he needed some time to relax. At 11:26 a.m., they arrived at the Izawa residence. After the long drive home, Hitoshi wheeled Izuku into the house, followed by his parents. Hitoshi asked Izuku where he wanted to go, and Izuku replied that he wanted to go to his bedroom. Hitoshi looked at Izuku's parents for permission, and they nodded in agreement. Once they reached the room, Hitoshi lifted Izuku so that he was sitting on the bed and asked if there was anything he could get for him. Izuku requested some comfier clothes, and Hitoshi began searching for something for him to relax in. Izuku then asked if Hitoshi could grab the hoodie he had lent him, which was hanging in the closet. With a light blush on his face, Hitoshi retrieved the requested hoodie and handed the pile of clothes to Izuku. Hitoshi asked if Izuku could dress himself, and Izuku responded that he thought he could. Hitoshi nodded and waited just outside the door. After about a minute, Izuku called for him to come back in. When Hitoshi opened the door, he was greeted by an adorable sight. Izuku was wearing a pair of blue sweatpants and his oversized black hoodie, all wrapped up in one of the blankets from the bed. Hitoshi asked what Izuku wanted to do next, and Izuku said he just wanted to take a nap, likely exhausted from the hospital visit. Hitoshi agreed and turned to turn off the light, but a small voice stopped him. Izuku asked if Hitoshi would stay with him until he fell asleep. Hitoshi readily agreed and walked over to the chair next to the bed, smiling at his boyfriend. Izuku then invited Hitoshi to lay with him if he wanted. Hitoshi hesitated, wanting to ensure Izuku was comfortable and not reminded of the difficult situation he had been in. Izuku reassured him that he was okay with it, so Hitoshi slowly got up and lay down in front of Izuku, making sure not to startle him. Once he was settled under the covers, Izuku scooched closer and wrapped his arms around Hitoshi's chest. Hitoshi wrapped his arms around Izuku's back and nuzzled into his hair. Soon enough, they both fell asleep, content just to be with each other. 4 days later, at 2 a.m. in the Izawa residence, Izuku lay in bed next to Hitoshi, who was staying the night. He tossed and turned in his sweat-soaked pajamas, haunted by nightmares. He found himself running toward a blue inferno, hearing his mother scream for him as a building exploded. The scene shifted, and he saw a Nomu holding his father down, twisting his arm back with a sickening sound. He desperately tried to save him, but the blue flames blocked his path, and he watched helplessly as his father was consumed by the fire. The scene changed again, and he was in the bedroom at the League's hideout, where Tamura stood at the door. As Tamura approached, Hitoshi rushed in, but with one look at Izuku he scoffed and walked away. Izuku was suddenly jolted awake, shaking uncontrollably and crying. Hitoshi reached out to comfort him, but Izuku slapped his hand away, panicking. Realizing what he had done, Izuku gasped and apologized, his words choked by sobs. Hitoshi, feeling hurt but understanding, asked if he could hug Izuku. Izuku nodded and climbed into Hitoshi's arms, melting into the warm embrace. As Hitoshi ran his hand through Izuku's hair, he asked what had scared him so much. Izuku took a shaky breath and moved closer, revealing that his dream had been about losing his mother and father to the flames, and he had felt abandoned by Hitoshi. Hitoshi, shocked, assured Izuku that he would never leave him, expressing his love for him. Though he knew Izuku might not say it back, it felt right to say. To his surprise, Izuku replied that he loved Hitoshi too, nuzzling into his neck as his breath began to slow, and the tears gradually ceased. Izuku then mentioned he needed to use the bathroom and felt Hitoshi nod in response. After about 10 minutes, Hitoshi grew worried and decided to check on him, hearing the buzz of clippers on the other side of the door. Izuku slowly pushed the door open to find himself watching as he cut off all of his long, beautiful hair. He asked if he could help, reaching for the clippers, which Izuku handed over. He pressed the end lightly to the sides of his boyfriend's head and styled his hair with care. When he finished, Izuku's hair was longer and curly on top, with the sides closely shaved. The entire process took about 20 minutes, in addition to the 10 minutes Izuku had spent working on it himself. Unbeknownst to the boys, Shota and Hizashi were watching from the doorway, having been awakened by the sound of the clippers. Shota, particularly tired, told them to go to bed. Both younger males jumped at the command and complied. Izuku started to protest, but Shota firmly reiterated his instruction, assuring them that they would take care of things. Grateful, Izuku embraced his fathers in a warm hug for the first time since returning home, then walked back to his room. He nestled close to Hitoshi, enjoying the warmth of his body, and soon drifted back to sleep. 3 days later. 7 a.m. Izawa residence. Izuku woke up once again to the blaring of his alarm clock, but this time the noise was welcome. He sprang out of bed, excited to be going back to school. The past week had been dull, to say the least. He put on his uniform, opting not to wear the blazer for what felt like the first time ever. He no longer needed to hide his arms, although they were still bandaged to protect the stitches the doctors had placed. Walking into the kitchen, he was pleased to see breakfast already set out for him. Taking his seat at the table, he began to enjoy the delicious food. His father asked if he was sure he was ready to return to school, offering him another week off if needed. Izuku reassured him that he would be fine, mentioning that Hitoshi was in the same class and that his dad was his homeroom teacher. He knew he could find them if he needed anything. His father reminded him to promise he would come and find him if anything happened, to which Izuku agreed. After finishing his breakfast, he walked out the door, saying a quick goodbye to his fathers. Go beyond. Plus Ultra. Izuku decided to take his bike to school since he and his fathers lived nearby. On the way, he unexpectedly bumped into Hitoshi. Hitoshi sat up and rubbed his head, assuring Izuku that he was fine. Izuku accepted Hitoshi's hand to help him up and asked if Hitoshi wanted to walk the rest of the way together. Hitoshi agreed, jokingly warning Izuku not to knock him over again. They continued their walk hand in hand, with Hitoshi pushing Izuku's bike like a true gentleman. As they approached the school, Hitoshi parked Izuku's bike, and they made their way inside. It was evident to anyone watching that they were happy to be together, with smiles on their faces and a constant flow of jokes and conversation. Both of them had a permanent blush on their cheeks. Upon reaching the large door of Class 1A, Hitoshi asked Izuku if he was sure he was ready to return. Izuku nodded firmly, taking Hitoshi's hand for support. After a deep breath, he pushed open the door. The sight that greeted them was disheartening. The absence of Izuku and Hitoshi had clearly affected their classmates. As soon as the class recognized them, excitement erupted. The noise and barrage of questions overwhelmed Izuku, causing him to panic and hyperventilate, tears welling in his eyes. Suddenly, Katsuki Bakugu shouted for everyone to back off, expressing concern for Izuku's distress. The class fell silent, shocked that Bakugu would come to Izuku's aid. Bakugu turned to see Izuku crying and gently reassured him that there was no need to cry. When he attempted to hug Izuku, the boy flinched in fear. Izuku, trembling, pleaded for Bakugu not to hurt him again. Bakugu was taken aback, realizing the impact of the villain's actions on Izuku. He gently reminded Izuku that he was Kaken, and a look of sadness crossed his face as Izuku recognized him and embraced him tightly, apologizing for being scared. Bakugu returned the hug, stroking Izuku's hair in an attempt to comfort him. He noticed how much shorter Izuku's hair had become, wondering what had happened during his absence. Just as Izuku began to calm down, Aizawa and Shinso entered the room. Hitoshi had stepped out to get help when he noticed Izuku panicking. Both Aizawa and Shinso were surprised to see Bakugu comforting Izuku, something they hadn't expected. Bakugu pulled away from the hug and asked if Izuku was okay now. Izuku nodded, wiping his tears. Izawa then instructed the class to return to their seats, and the students complied, still in shock. Izawa acknowledged Bakugo with a nod of gratitude, which Bakugo returned. Izawa informed the class that they could ask questions later but advised them to be considerate and not cause panic. He resumed the lesson as if nothing had happened, and the day passed quickly. As the final class neared its end, a lilac-haired boy anxiously watched the clock. When the bell rang, he quickly packed his belongings and chased after Bakugo, catching up to him in the hallway. He reached out and grabbed Bakugo's shoulder, only to be met with Bakugo's irritated response. Shinso introduced himself and thanked Bakugo for calming Izuku earlier. Bakugo dismissed the gratitude, revealing his deep care for Izuku. He expressed that when the villains took Izuku, all he could think about was bringing him back. He declared that he loved Izuku as a friend and warned Shinso that if he ever hurt Izuku, he would face serious consequences. Shinso assured Bakugo that he would never harm Izuku. With that, Bakugo turned and continued his walk home, unaware that his friendship with Shinso would strengthen through their shared desire to protect Izuku. 1 month later, at 8:23 a.m., the Izawa family gathered at the kitchen table for breakfast, still in their pajamas since it was Saturday. Hitoshi had been spending nearly as much time with the Izawas as he did with his own family. Of course, none of them minded. In fact, the Izawas loved having Hitoshi over. He was kind and polite, always helping around the house, and he had a way of putting Izuku at ease when anxiety threatened to overwhelm him. Izuku's parents didn't mind his absence. Unbeknownst to anyone else, the Shinsis were abusive. They resented Hitoshi for his quirk and made it a point to see him as little as possible. When they were under the influence, they would lash out at him. Hitoshi despised that home. He had found a new, loving family in the Izawas. As they continued to eat, Izuku surprised them with a question. He asked if they could visit the cemetery, not looking up from his food. Hisashi was puzzled and asked why. Izuku revealed that it had been 7 years since his mother passed away. Hitoshi choked slightly on his food in surprise. Hisashi, though pained, agreed to take them, asking if Izuku wanted to pick up flowers beforehand. Izuku, with a sad smile, mentioned he had been saving up to decorate her grave nicely and asked if Hitoshi could join them. Hitoshi readily agreed, promising to inform his parents that he would be late. They finished their meal in silence. Afterward, Izuku washed his bowl and retreated to his room without a word to the others. At 11:45 a.m., as the time to leave approached, Izuku changed into a nicer outfit. He was in his boxers when he heard the door creak open and instinctively covered himself. Hitoshi, caught off guard, quickly apologized and shut the door. Izuku chose dark gray dress pants and a pale green dress shirt. He had missed his mother's funeral while in the hospital, and he remembered visiting her grave, where he found a beautiful headstone shaped like an angel. It was a gift from those who knew her, and he learned that Mitsuki had chosen it. To Izuku, it felt fitting. His mother was a gift from heaven, radiating kindness that everyone adored. After buttoning his shirt and arranging his hair, he grabbed his money from the dresser. When he emerged, he found his dad's and Hitoshi dressed nicely. Shota had his hair half up and wore a black dress shirt and pants. Hisashi sported a loose ponytail with a dark gray shirt and light gray pants, while Hitoshi had most of his hair in a small ponytail, wearing a deep orange button-down that highlighted his lilac eyes. Hitoshi glanced at Izuku, a light blush coloring his cheeks as he thought how beautiful Izuku looked. Hisashi, spinning the car keys around his finger, asked if they were ready to go. Izuku quietly affirmed, and they all piled into the car, with Hitoshi and Izuku holding hands in the back seat. After a stop at the store, they arrived at the cemetery. Izuku had bought tulips, his mother's favorite flowers, to plant, along with a bouquet of white and green roses to lay on her grave. A local cemetery. The family arrived at the cemetery, driving to the spot Izuku had instructed them to. They were met by a beautiful statue of a white angel, while the rest of the grave remained bare and desolate. Izuku took a quivering breath. He hadn't visited his mother in years. Suddenly he felt Hitoshi hold his hand tighter. All 4 men got out of the car and began unloading the flowers. Izuku took the tulips and started digging a hole to plant them. As he dug, tears streamed down his face. He expressed his feelings, reflecting on his regrets and the challenges he faced without her. He shared how much he missed her, how he had a new family that loved him, and how he was determined to become a hero, just as he had always dreamed. He mentioned his quirks and how he was meant to be the next symbol of peace. He wished she could see the person he had become and promised to grow stronger so he would never have to lose anyone again. He finished planting the flowers and turned to see his 3 companions crying, realizing he had been thinking out loud again. Hitoshi was the first to walk over to Izuku, embracing him tightly. The other 2 joined in, wrapping the boys in a warm hug. Izuku was now overwhelmed with emotion. After a while, they broke apart to get the roses. Izuku carefully placed them at the feet of the angel, expressing his love and promising to make her proud. With one last glance, he walked away, taking Hitoshi's hand. The 4 of them rode home in silence. 1:13 p.m. Izawa residence. Once they arrived home, Izuku mentioned that he was going to take a nap. All the crying had exhausted him, though he didn't share this with the others. He changed quickly into some sweats, finding his bed more comfortable than usual as his eyelids grew heavy. Just as he was about to fall asleep, a light knock came at his door. It cracked open to reveal his lilac-haired boyfriend. Hitoshi softly said he would change real quick. Izuku nodded and turned away to give him some privacy. Hitoshi had a couple of drawers filled with his clothes at the Izawa house since he spent so much time there. When Hitoshi was done, he wore a black tank top and joggers. He asked Izuku if he could take a nap with him, mentioning that the day had tired him out too. Izuku didn't respond verbally but moved back to make room for Hitoshi, who slid under the covers. Izuku wrapped his arms around Hitoshi's waist, enjoying the warmth radiating from him. Hitoshi wrapped his arms around Izuku's shoulders, resting his chin on top of Izuku's head. Izuku thanked Hitoshi for being there for him that day. Hitoshi promised he would always be there when needed. Izuku loosened his grip slightly and looked into Hitoshi's lavender eyes, which met his deep green ones. He smiled lightly, feeling a connection. He moved closer, pausing for a moment, seeking permission. Hitoshi closed his eyes, and they shared a gentle kiss. Izuku melted into the moment, parting his lips just enough to allow Hitoshi to deepen the kiss. Afterward, Izuku laid his head on Hitoshi's chest, breathing in the familiar scent. He expressed his love for Hitoshi, who reciprocated the sentiment. Slowly, their breaths evened out, and they both fell into a calm, blissful sleep. 2 days later, 8:15 a.m. UA High School Class 1A. Izawa finally woke up from his morning nap. He slowly emerged from his sleeping bag and stood in front of the class. He commanded silence, and the class quickly complied, sensing his intense gaze. Once they were quiet, he announced that next week they would participate in the annual UA Sports Festival. The class erupted with excitement, but Izawa silenced them again with another glare. Just as he was about to continue, Ida raised his hand. He asked if the sports festival had originally been scheduled for 2 weeks after the USJ incident. Izawa confirmed it had been postponed due to a student being held captive. He continued, explaining that this festival would be a great opportunity for them to showcase their abilities to the world. The focus would be on the first years, specifically them, as everyone was waiting for them to crack under pressure. He urged them to prove their abilities and not underestimate their opponents, emphasizing the importance of training hard. The class was in absolute disbelief, filled with anticipation for the challenges ahead. None of them had ever heard Izawa express so much passion in his voice, except for his son and Shinso. He continued, explaining that the day's lesson would focus on the history of heroism. The school day felt longer than usual, and by lunchtime, half the class struggled to stay awake. When the bell finally rang, the students rushed to the cafeteria. Izuku scanned the room to find where he would be sitting that day. As first years, he and his friends didn't have guaranteed seats. When he spotted them, he collected his meal and made his way to the booth where Ida, Ochako, Todoroki, and Hitoshi were already waiting. He waved excitedly as he took his seat next to Hitoshi, slipping his hand into the others. After a few minutes of light-hearted chatter, Hitoshi caught Izuku's attention. He asked if Izuku had ever considered using his quirk for purposes other than freezing people. Izuku admitted he hadn't tried. Hitoshi suggested that Izuku should attempt to make him do something. With his next speaker on, Izuku felt confident he wouldn't accidentally affect anyone else. The table held its breath as Izuku thought for a moment before instructing Hitoshi to raise his left hand. The familiar purple barrier formed around Hitoshi as he complied, and Izuku released his hold. Hitoshi's eyes widened in amazement. The group began to marvel at Izuku's newfound ability when Todoroki interjected, questioning if Hitoshi felt any jealousy. Hitoshi dismissed the notion, stating he was happy for Izuku and would feel the same if his boyfriend discovered a new use for his quirk. The tension between the two boys was palpable until Todoroki finally ended the conversation. After finishing their lunches, the group engaged in small talk until the lunch bell rang. Class 1A endured the rest of their classes, all of them eager for the final bell. By the end of the last class, even Ida appeared drained from the workload. The much-anticipated sound finally came, and Present Mike reminded the class to complete their worksheets on kanji as they filed out of the room. Izuku approached the front of the room to speak with his father. He looked up at Hisashi with excitement in his eyes and said they needed to talk. Izuku explained the events of lunch, and Hisashi listened in awe. They were interrupted by Shota, who entered the room and announced that they had training to do. Both Izuku and Hisashi turned to see the sleep-deprived Ravenet standing in the doorway, who smiled slightly when he met Izuku's gaze. Shota informed them they would not be returning to the dojo and walked away, leaving them confused. With nothing else to do, they decided to wait and talk until he returned. When he did, he was accompanied by Ectoplasm and Principal Nizu. Nizu cheerfully asked if they were ready to go, and Hisashi and Izuku nodded, following the three men. They arrived at a vast training ground, much larger than the one Class 1A used for their fitness test. Shota explained that they had brought Izuku there for specialized training, emphasizing that they needed to understand the full power of his quirk. Nizu confirmed that they wanted to see how many people Izuku could control at once. Izuku nodded, realizing they also intended to test his range. As they began, Izuku discovered his range was seemingly limitless. When they tested how many people he could control, he managed to command at least 34, surpassing Ectoplasm's ability to produce 30 copies of himself. As the training progressed, All Might joined them, apologizing for his tardiness. They continued for what felt like hours, with more teachers gathering to witness Izuku's remarkable quirk. Only a few knew about One for All, and even fewer were aware that Izuku was All Might's successor. Nizu eventually asked for volunteers to help test Izuku's quirk, and nearly everyone eagerly stepped forward. Izuku tested his capacity again, successfully controlling 50 teachers. Nizu politely requested Izuku to call one of his fathers and walk away, instructing him to wait until someone came to retrieve him. Izuku confirmed he understood and began walking in a straight line while dialing Hisashi's number. When he was finally told to stop, Nizu was the one to come get him. Before they walked back, Nizu gave him one last instruction. He asked Izuku to yell as loud as he could, without needing to activate his quirk. Izuku complied and then walked back to the training ground with the principal. Nizu called out to Hisashi and Shota, and Izuku looked at the teachers in amazement. Somehow, even without him touching them, they were free of his quirk. This led him to ponder the mechanics of his ability. He thought about how his quirk was activated by his voice and realized that his teachers must have escaped its influence when he was at his loudest. He considered the possibility that his control over inanimate objects was not about being heard, but rather about whether the sound waves he produced could reach his target. This revelation made him wonder about the limits of his quirk. Was he restricted by what each object could do, or was he only limited by his own imagination? All Might caught his attention, speaking in a slightly hushed tone, urging him to stop muttering as it was unsettling. Izuku chuckled, realizing he had been thinking out loud, and offered a genuine smile before returning to where Nizu stood. Nizu greeted Izuku and mentioned that he had been explaining how he thought Izuku's quirk worked to his father's. He felt he had most of it figured out. Izuku, filled with curiosity, asked if he could try one more thing. Nizu enthusiastically agreed. Izuku approached a random rock and commanded it to float. To everyone's surprise, the rock levitated into the sky, surrounded by the purple tint of Izuku's quirk, before it came crashing back down to its original position. He then commanded it to shatter, and the rock obeyed. When he commanded it to reunite, the shards glowed purple before returning to their original shape. Nizu observed happily that Izuku's quirk seemed only limited by his imagination. This was one of the most powerful quirks he had ever seen. After conducting a few more tests, the Aizawa family headed home for the day, reflecting on the eventful training session. In the following week, Izuku engaged in strength training with all might, knowing he couldn't always rely on his voice. After each session, he trained with either Hizashi or Shota. Hizashi taught him how to project his voice better and control its direction without support items, while Shota continued to teach him how to effectively use his capture scarf and other skills essential for an underground hero. When the day of the sports festival finally arrived, Izuku felt ready for anything. The arena at UA High School was packed with spectators eager to see the students perform. Izuku and Hitoshi sat side by side in one of the waiting rooms, waiting for their class to be announced. Izuku reflected on a conversation he had with All Might the night before after training. All Might had expressed pride in Izuku's progress, acknowledging the hardships he had faced and how far he had come. He encouraged Izuku to give his best in the upcoming event and to enter the arena with confidence, reminding him to declare his presence to the world. Izuku turned to Hitoshi and asked him not to go easy on him if they ever had to fight each other. Hitoshi, taken aback by the determination in Izuku's voice, assured him he wouldn't. Suddenly, Katsuki Bokogu burst into the room, urging them not to worry. He reassured them of their strength, and despite his usual brashness, he managed to lift their spirits. Kirishima teased Bokogu, and the familiar banter resumed, bringing a sense of normalcy back to the group. As the time ticked closer to 8 o'clock, nerves began to settle in among the classmates, but they knew they had to focus on the challenge ahead. Right now, they had to focus on winning. Present Mike, from his post in the announcer's booth, shouted with enthusiasm, rallying the crowd. The audience responded with a roar of excitement as Izuku took a deep breath and led his classmates out onto the open field. After Present Mike finished introducing the classes, Midnight took the stage. She delivered an inspiring speech about determination, which elicited a few surprised reactions from the crowd. Then she announced Aizawa Izuku as the representative of the first years. The stadium fell silent as the small, seemingly frail boy approached the podium. He had come in first during the entrance exams and knew he needed to say something impactful. He declared that they should not be underestimated before stepping away, leaving the audience in shock at his confidence. His classmates were equally surprised. On any other day, he would have been a nervous wreck, but today he appeared more composed than ever. He was ready to win. After Midnight's playful remarks, she announced that the first test would be an obstacle course. Present Mic's voice boomed as he encouraged the listeners to get ready before shouting, "Go!" Everyone dashed forward. Izuku considered using his quirk to halt the others but decided to let them have their moment to shine. As they approached the first obstacle, they were taken aback by the imposing zero-pointer robots. Only Aizawa and Todoroki continued running. Todoroki quickly trapped the two robots in ice while freezing some of the other competitors in place. Anticipating this, Izuku was already in motion, soaring through the air and lunging toward one of the robots. His fist connected with the robot's head, sending it crashing down. He sprinted onward, but Todoroki's use of ice gave him an advantage in speed. Despite his aching limbs from using one for all, Izuku pushed himself to run as fast as he could. Upon reaching the next obstacle, he halted, staring at a vast canyon. He wondered how they had the resources to construct such a challenge. His thoughts were interrupted by a girl laughing maniacally as she shot a harpoon to one of the canyon's pillars. Tsuyu quickly followed, using her tongue to cross. Izuku quickly formulated a plan. He turned to the others behind him and warned them not to follow, explaining that the bridge would collapse once he was out of earshot. He commanded the rocks to form a bridge and carefully crossed, ensuring no part of him touched the stone. Once he reached the other side, he returned the rocks to their original state. As he approached the third and final obstacle, he realized it was time to demonstrate his true potential. While the other competitors dodged the bombs, Izuku shouted for everyone to stop. Instantly, Everything froze: the people, the flying debris, and the explosions. He faintly heard his father commenting on his quirk's power, but he remained focused on the task at hand. He sprinted through the minefield as if it were an ordinary sidewalk, crossing the finish line with ease. Turning back, he encouraged the other students to go, just as explosions erupted behind him as they rushed across the field, eager to take advantage of his quirk. He walked back onto the main field, greeted by the overwhelming cheers of the crowd. Looking up at the commentary booth, he saw his dad smiling proudly. Present Mike continued his enthusiastic commentary as more students emerged from the tunnel. Izuku thought to himself that they would regret underestimating them. This was just the beginning. Izuku turned to see who had come in second place and found himself face to face with a frustrated Todoroki. He accused Izuku of playing dirty, to which Izuku replied that everyone had their tactics. He then declared that it didn't matter how they played, he was determined to win. Midnight praised everyone's performance and announced that the next game would be a cavalry battle, explaining the rules and point values. All eyes turned to Aizawa, who thought sarcastically that this should be interesting. The students were given 5 minutes to form teams, and Izuku already knew who he wanted on his. He called out to Bakugo and Ida, asking them to join him. Bakugo responded dismissively, while Ida declined, stating he needed to prove himself against Izuku. Izuku thanked him for his honesty and smiled as he and Bakugo walked away. Then he had another idea. He called out to Uraraka. Izuku had his whole team planned out as he looked over at Ida, who was engaged in conversation with a pink-haired girl wearing unusual goggles. He refocused on his own team, assigning positions. Tokiyami, I want you to be right in front, and Kaken in the back. Uraraka, you'll be. Suddenly, the pink-haired girl interrupted him, declaring her desire to join the team. She pointed at Ida, claiming he didn't see her as a valuable asset and that she wanted to prove him wrong. Bakugo enthusiastically approved of her spirit, though he suggested she refine her word choice. Izuku, with his trademark smile, welcomed her to the team. Once everything was settled, Mei and Tokiyami took the front positions, while Uraraka and Bakugo were in the back, with Izuku as the rider. He exchanged a glance with Hitoshi, the rider of his opposing team, and mouthed encouragement to him. Hitoshi nodded in response. Izuku then observed Ida's team, which included Yaoyorozu, Todoroki, and Kaminari, all wearing determined expressions. Everyone was here to win. Midnight announced the end of their 5-minute preparation PRD and posted the teams. Izuku Aizawa, Achiko Uraraka, Fumikage Tokoyami, Meihatsum, Katsuki Bakugo, Tetsu 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 Tetsu, Juzo Hananuki, Yosetsu Aways, Burashiza, Shoto Todoroki, Tenya Ida, Momo Yaoyorozu, Denki Kaminari, Ijiro Kirishima, Mina Ishido, Antasiro, Mizo Sho, Chikuchi Togaike, Siu Azui, Toru Hagakure, Kyokujiro, Rikido Sato, Koji Koda, Nito Minoma, Kozai Tsuburaba, Sunkai Shirhai Kuwaro, Hitoshi Shinso, Nirenjiki Shoda, Yuga Oyama, Mashireo Ojiro, Dasuka Kendo, Reiko Yanagi, Setsuna Tokage, Kinoko Komori, Bukoda, Kojiro Bando, Manga Kukudashi, Hiryurin, Jiroda Shishida, Pony Tsunatori, Tagaru Kamakiri. The teams took their marks, moving to the outskirts of the arena to prepare their strategies. In a flashback, Hitoshi had been advised by Izuku to let his team think for themselves, as it would help them perform better. Hitoshi acknowledged the advice, ruffling Izuku's hair affectionately. As the signal to start rang out, all teams rushed toward Team Aizawa, unaware they were up against formidable opponents. Izuku asked if everyone was touching a part of his skin, and upon receiving confirmation, he took a deep breath and commanded everyone to stop. The teams halted in their tracks, and he instructed them on what to do next. Uraraka used Mei's support boots to lift the team into the air while Bakugo propelled them forward. Tokiyami summoned Dark Shadow to gather points from the other teams. The arena fell silent as everyone watched in awe as one team amassed all the points. After collecting the points, they landed and waited for the timer to run out. Midnight, still in shock, announced the end of the round and the advancing teams based on their scores. Once Izuku released the other students, Midnight explained her decision to advance the top placers from the previous stage, excluding the winning team. She announced that the next game would consist of one-on-one battles, but first, there would be a lunch break, advising the students to rest before the challenges ahead. Izuku settled in one of the waiting rooms, focusing on relaxing and clearing his mind. He reminded himself that he needed to immobilize his opponent and not underestimate anyone. Hitoshi approached him, suggesting they grab some lunch. Izuku agreed and followed him to a booth serving katsudon. They ordered their meals, and Hitoshi insisted on paying despite Izuku's protests. Finding a shady spot under a tree, they sat down to eat in silence. After finishing, Hitoshi pulled Izuku close, expressing his happiness for Izuku's progress. Izuku promised to win for both of them, and as he nestled against Hitoshi, he gradually drifted off to sleep. Hitoshi whispered his affection, knowing Izuku couldn't hear him, and leaned back against the tree, careful not to disturb him. Suddenly, Hitoshi was awakened by the sound of Shota yelling at Hisashi. Izuku, already awake, turned away, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "How many times do I have to tell you to turn your flash off?" Hitoshi slowly pieced everything together. Hisashi had taken a picture of him and Izuku sleeping together, and now he felt his cheeks heat up. Realizing he was still holding Izuku, he quickly let go and scooted away a bit, his face still flushed. After a few more moments of scolding Hisashi, Shota turned to Izuku and suggested he warm up since he was in the first match, which would start in 15 minutes. Izuku nodded, got up, and gave Hitoshi a quick peck on the cheek before hugging his dad's and running off toward the arena. Hitoshi, feeling a bit confused, asked if they were supposed to be announcing. Hisashi joked that there wasn't much excitement in announcing fried rice, but they needed to return soon. Shota asked Hisashi to go ahead, wanting to speak with Hitoshi for a moment. Hisashi reluctantly agreed and headed off in the same direction as Izuku. Hitoshi hesitated, unsure of what to say. Shota expressed his gratitude, acknowledging how much Hitoshi had helped his son and how glad he was that Hitoshi had become part of their family. He walked away before Hitoshi could respond, avoiding confrontation but feeling compelled to share those words. When Izuku returned to the waiting room, he had only 10 minutes left to stretch and plan. He glanced at the TV mounted on the wall, which displayed the matchups. Izuku Aizawa vs Shoto Todoroki. Ochako Uraraka vs Katsuki Bakugu. Tsuyu Azui vs Juzo Hananuki. Tetsu Tetsu vs Eijiro Kirishima. Hanta Siro vs Ibara Shiozaki. Mei Hatsum vs Tenya Ida. Fumikage Tokoyami vs Mizo Shoji. Yosetsu Owaze vs Mashireo Ojiro. As the minutes passed, Izuku found himself standing at the edge of the platform where he would face Todoroki. He focused, reminding himself to concentrate, breathe, and win. With determination, he opened his eyes and glared across the platform at Todoroki, who returned the gaze. Midnight called for the match to begin, and Izuku sprinted toward the center while dodging Todoroki's ice. When he reached his destination, he took a deep breath and began to shout, but was abruptly cut off by a massive wall of ice that engulfed him, leaving him unable to move. Midnight asked if he could move, holding her whip up, ready to declare Todoroki the winner. Izuku admitted he couldn't at the moment but quickly thought of a plan. With a shout, he commanded the ice to shatter into countless tiny shards, freeing him. He stood up, dusted himself off, and charged forward, grinning at Todoroki. He noted that Todoroki had forgotten to cover his skin. Todoroki was taken aback by Izuku's persistence and strength. Izuku quickly commanded the shards of ice to form a wall, pushing Todoroki toward the edge of the platform. As the wall advanced, Todoroki struggled to push it back, panic setting in as he neared the red boundary. He had to choose between fire or ice. Choosing fire, Todoroki felt his body heat up just as a loud whistle signaled the end of the match. Midnight announced that Todoroki was out of bounds, declaring Izuku the winner. Hitoshi's dads cheered, with Hisashi excitedly commenting on the match. As the excitement continued, Izuku released his hold on the ice, allowing Todoroki to evaporate it. They exchanged a handshake, with Todoroki complimenting the fight. Izuku thanked him, and they both retreated to different waiting rooms to rest. Izuku took a quick nap to prepare for his next fight and woke up 30 minutes later, noticing that all the other matches had concluded. The next round of matches was displayed on the TV. Fumikage Tokoyami vs Katsuki Bakugo. Hanta Siro vs Eijiro Kirishima. Tenya Ida vs Izuku Aizawa. Juzo Hananuki vs Mashireo Ojiro. Izuku felt a surge of excitement as he anticipated the upcoming matches. Bakugo had easily defeated Tokoyami, exploiting Dark Shadow's weaknesses, while Siro managed to immobilize Kirishima with tape. Now it was Izuku's turn to face Ida. Both were aware that the match would be swift. It would either be Ida pushing Izuku out of bounds or Izuku winning. They approached the edges of the platform, each determined to succeed. Present Mike enthusiastically commented on their quirks while Eraserhead provided a touch of sanity. Midnight raised her whip and took a deep breath. As she cracked it down, Ida was already halfway across the platform. Izuku inhaled deeply as Ida approached. 20 feet. Ida called for Izuku to walk out of bounds, and with a sigh of relief, he complied. After the match, Izuku approached Ida to unfreeze him, apologizing for the quick finish. Ida assured him it was no problem, acknowledging that he would have done the same. With one more match standing between him and the final round, Izuku knew he had to showcase One for All again. He wanted everyone to see that he was more than just a one-trick pony. The next set of matches was announced. Katsuki Bakugo vs Hanta Siro. Mashireo Ojiro vs Izuku Aizawa. Izuku sat in the waiting room, anticipating the outcome of the first match. Bakugo won decisively, melting through Siro's tape and sending him out of the ring with a powerful explosion. Izuku's match against Ojiro ended quickly as well. Even without using either of his quirks, Ojiro stood no chance. Now, it was time for Izuku to face Bakugo. As Izuku settled back into the waiting room, Bakugo entered, urging him not to hold back and to come at him with everything he had. Izuku responded with a determined smile, ready for the challenge ahead. Winning this tournament was crucial for Izuku's dream of becoming a hero. In a flashback, Mr. Aizawa had warned the class about the importance of the tournament. He emphasized that talent scouts would be present, and this was their chance to impress the professionals they would work with during their upcoming internships. He urged them not to mess it up. As the minutes ticked away, Izuku found himself once again in front of the fighting platform, but this time felt different. He understood that Bakugo would be his toughest opponent, not due to physical strength, but because of Bakugo's relentless determination to win. When Midnight's whip signaled the start of the final match, Bakugo propelled himself forward with an explosion, aiming directly at Izuku. Izuku knew he had to act quickly to avoid giving Bakugo the advantage. As Bakugo unleashed his attack, Izuku barely managed to stay on the platform, feeling the impact reverberate through his body. He whispered to himself, frustrated that he couldn't rely on his voice to win this time. He had to fight with One for All. Gathering his resolve, he locked eyes with Bakugo and sprinted forward, using One for All to enhance his speed. Bakugo made the first move, leaping into the air to deliver a powerful right hook. Izuku ducked under the attack, quickly rising to deliver a strong blow to Bakugo's back, careful to hold back his power to avoid serious injury. The crowd gasped as Bakugo was sent sprawling across the platform. Regaining his footing, Bakugo charged at Izuku again, leading with a powerful left swing. Izuku anticipated the move and caught Bakugo's fist in a firm grip. He declared that he wouldn't lose to Bakugo, despite the pain in his voice. With a swift motion, he spun Bakugo around and sent him out of bounds. Midnight announced the victory, declaring Izuku the winner. He approached Bakugo, who lay on the other side of the arena, and offered him a hand. Bakugo acknowledged Izuku's strength with a smirk, admitting that he hadn't held back. Izuku shook his head, preferring not to speak. Bakugo suggested they head to Recovery Girl, who quickly healed their injuries. Afterward, they returned to the arena to accept their medals. While Bakugo and Ojiro smiled proudly, Izuku stood with a distant expression. When All Might presented the medals, he struggled to find words for Izuku, who usually would have been overjoyed but instead appeared disappointed. All Might expressed his pride in Izuku, placing the medal around his neck, to which Izuku simply nodded. Later that day, the Izawa family gathered around the dinner table, intended to celebrate Izuku's success. However, the atmosphere was subdued, as no one knew how to address Izuku's apparent mood. Finally, Shota broke the silence, asking what was bothering him. Izuku looked up, confused by the concern. He downplayed his feelings, but Hitoshi pressed him, pointing out that Izuku's usual excitement was missing. Izuku felt irritated by the questions but knew he had to respond. He admitted that it felt like he hadn't truly earned his victory, despite being grateful for his strong quirk. Hizashi chimed in, reminding Izuku of the hard work he had put in over the years to reach this point. He encouraged Izuku to celebrate his achievement, which brought a small smile to Izuku's face. The rest of the evening was filled with laughter and warmth, creating a sense of peace among the family. As night fell, Hitoshi said his goodbyes and headed home. At the Shinso residence, Hitoshi quietly opened the back door, aware that he was late. He hurried upstairs, trying to avoid making noise, but the second-to-last step creaked under his weight, causing him to freeze. His mother called out, and he knew he couldn't respond without facing consequences. He cautiously walked downstairs to find her sitting on the couch, waving at her. She reminded him that his father would be upset about his tardiness. Hitoshi was reminded to be quiet, or he would upset his father even more. He nodded and carefully ascended the stairs, avoiding the second-to-last step. Once in his room, he shut the door behind him, remembering how his father had removed the lock years ago after Hitoshi had tried to keep him out. He lay on his bed, waiting for the familiar heavy footfalls of his father to approach. No matter how long it took, they always. The door creaked open, revealing a tall, thin man with purple hair. He was greeted with a sharp reprimand about being late. Hitoshi stammered an apology, but his words were cut short when his father's hand struck his face. The command to remain silent was harsh, and Hitoshi felt the sting of the bruise forming on his cheek. Another blow followed, accompanied by a demand to look his father in the eye. The verbal and physical abuse continued relentlessly, with his father lamenting the burden of having a son he deemed a villain. In a moment of desperation, Hitoshi called out for his mother. Just then she rushed in, tears streaming down her face as she urged him to pack his things. She warned him that he needed to leave before his father could unleash his full fury. Hitoshi quickly grabbed a suitcase and began to fill it with clothes. He expressed his sorrow to his mother, pulling her into a tight embrace, and they exchanged words of love before he dashed out the door. Once he was gone, she turned to her husband, explaining what had transpired, and his displeasure was evident. Later that evening at the Izawa residence, Shota received a message from Hitoshi, who revealed that he had been kicked out and asked if he could stay for a while. Shota assured him that he could, but they would need to discuss the situation. Hitoshi promised to arrive shortly. Shota informed Izuku and Hizashi of Hitoshi's stay, and Izuku hurried to tidy up his room since Hitoshi would be sleeping there. When Hitoshi arrived, Shota opened the door to a heartbreaking sight. Hitoshi's hair fell over his face, failing to conceal the bruises on his cheek. His eyes were red and weary from crying. Shota instinctively pulled him into a comforting hug. Hitoshi, overwhelmed, admitted to having messed up. They moved to the living room, where Hizashi and Izuku were already seated, surprised by Hitoshi's condition. Hitoshi shared the painful details of his home life, explaining how his father had always disapproved of him since he developed his quirk. He spoke of his mother's unwavering support and love. Usually, the abuse was minimal, but this time it had escalated, and he had used his quirk to defend himself. He expressed his regret for causing trouble and his lack of a safe place to go. Shota reassured him that he could stay as long as he needed. Hizashi remained silent, and Izuku quietly left the room to give Hitoshi space. After changing into comfortable clothes, Hitoshi joined Izuku in his room. Hizashi and Shota explained the situation to Izuku, who quickly grasped the gravity of Hitoshi's circumstances. He wrapped his arms around Hitoshi as they settled into bed together. Hitoshi expressed his concern about burdening Izuku, but Izuku insisted that they were in this together, promising to always be there for him. Grateful, Hitoshi pulled Izuku closer, and they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms. Later, Hizashi and Shota checked on the boys to ensure they were okay. When Hisashi opened the door, he found them peacefully cuddled together. He pulled out his phone to capture the moment, but Shota snatched it away, taking a few pictures with a satisfied smile. He promised to send them to Hisashi later. A week later, at UA High School in Class 1A, the students noticed a large list on the front board. They had recently chosen their hero names, which varied in creativity. Among the notable names were Froppy, Uravity, and King Explosion Murder, which did not surprise Mr. Izawa. He was concerned for Ida, a family friend who had recently faced a dangerous encounter. Izawa had expected Ida to adopt the Ingenium name, but he had only written down his first name. As the bell rang, Mr. Izawa instructed the class to take their seats. Izuku stood in the classroom, listening to their teacher explain the internship offers. Izawa gestured to the board, which displayed the number of offers each student received. He reminded them to consider location, quirk compatibility, and experience when choosing an agency. The numbers were impressive. Izawa had received 7,892 offers, Todoroki had 4,123, and Bakugo had 3,556, while others like Tokoyami and Ida had fewer. After distributing the lists, Izawa announced he would be taking a nap and instructed the students not to disturb him. As soon as he left, chatter erupted among the class regarding their internship choices. Izuku heard his name mentioned occasionally but chose to focus on Hitoshi instead. Hitoshi expressed surprise at the sheer number of hero agencies available as he helped Izuku sort through the mountain of papers he had received. They decided to eliminate any agencies with an approval rating below 50% or a victory rating below 75%. After some time, they narrowed it down to 2 pages of potential choices. Izuku then asked Hitoshi about a hero named Gran Torino, who had experienced training pro heroes and had once taught at UA. Hitoshi suggested that Izuku ask his dads about him later, which Izuku agreed to do. Glancing over at Ida, Izuku noticed his friend sitting alone, looking troubled. Ida had been acting differently lately, and Izuku was one of the few who knew the reason behind it. Earlier, Ida had been called to the principal's office. When he returned, he appeared distressed, gathering his belongings without saying a word. Concerned, Izuku approached him and offered support, but Ida insisted he was fine. Izuku respected his friend's need for space but assured him he could reach out anytime. Later that day, Ida called Izuku, crying. After calming down, he revealed that his older brother was in critical condition after an encounter with Stain. A week later, Izuku found himself standing in front of an old brick apartment building. After learning about Gran Torino from All Might, he decided this would be the ideal place for his internship, given the man's connection to One for All. When no one answered his knock, he tried the doorknob, and the door creaked open. Inside, he found an elderly man in a hero costume lying on the floor. The old man, Gran Torino, quickly assured Izuku he was alive and acknowledged him as the problem child All Might had mentioned. Without wasting time, he declared that training would start immediately and instructed Izuku to enter and close the door. Gran Torino set a timer and told Izuku he had 5 minutes to stop him, using any means necessary to gauge his quirks. As the old man began to fly around the room, Izuku struggled to keep up. Gran Torino snatched the support item from around Izuku's neck, emphasizing that a hero should not rely on gadgets. Izuku focused on the old man's movements, observing the pattern of his flight. He noted the sequence of Gran Torino's trajectory, preparing for the right moment. When the old man approached again, Izuku called out for him to stop, managing to evade the attack and freeze Gran Torino in place momentarily. Gran Torino praised Izuku's keen observation skills, and they began working on using One for All more effectively. With practice, Izuku learned to control the power, gradually reducing the strain on his body. After several attempts, he finally managed to combine his quirks in a fight against Gran Torino. Initially, he struggled, but with perseverance, he improved significantly. By the 50th match, Izuku had won 44 times and lost only 6. Exhausted yet satisfied with his progress, they decided to call it a night, knowing that more training awaited them the next day. The next day, at 7:30 a.m., in an old apartment building, a gruff voice called out to Izuku, urging him to wake up. Slowly he opened his eyes, allowing them to adjust to the soft glow of the morning sun. His new teacher instructed him to put on his costume and meet him in the kitchen. Once downstairs, Izuku was tasked with preparing breakfast. Gran Torino had only a box of pastries, so Izuku heated them in the microwave. After finishing their simple meal, the two sparred for about 4 hours. Both were exhausted and decided to take a break. An hour later, Gran Torino informed Izuku that they would be patrolling in Shibuya that evening and would need to travel by train to get there. At 5 p.m., at Yamanashi train station, Gran Torino called out to his protege, urging him to hurry or they would miss the train. Izuku reminded him that his name was Izuku, but Gran Torino dismissed it and told him to get on the train. Izuku complied and took a seat next to the old hero. The train announcement echoed through the compartment, and Izuku perked up at the mention of Hosu, where his friend Ida was interning. He quickly texted Ida to check on him. Just as the train was approaching Hosu City, a loud crash interrupted the announcement, shaking the entire compartment. People began to scream at the sight of a disfigured creature. Izuku's mind raced as he realized they were facing a Nomu. Gran Torino shouted for Izuku to start evacuating people. Despite his protests that it was too dangerous, his teacher jumped from the car in pursuit of the Nomu. Izuku quickly evacuated the train and followed Gran Torino. He hopped from rooftop to rooftop, almost catching up to his teacher when he heard a scream from an alley. Deciding to investigate, he hurried toward the source of the commotion, typing a message into his phone as he went. He dropped down at the entrance of the alley with a small thud, but before he could assess the situation, he received a powerful blow to the throat, causing him to stumble back and cough. A voice urged him to leave, but before he could respond, another strike knocked him to the ground, a foot pressing down on his throat to silence him. The figure looming over him introduced himself as Kaizome Akaguro, known as Stain, the hero killer. Stain's quirk allowed him to paralyze anyone whose blood he ingested, and as he leaned down, Izuku felt a sharp pain on his cheek followed by the warmth of blood trickling down his face. Stain liked the blood from his blade, leaving Izuku unable to move. In his peripheral vision, he noticed another figure leaning against a bloodied wall. He recognized the pro-hero native. The man walked over to Ida, holding a long blade above him, and declared that heroes were all phonies, seeking only money and fame, lacking honor. He proclaimed that only All Might was worthy of defeating him. He then slammed the point of the blade into the boy's shoulder, causing him to cry out in pain. Izuku struggled to speak, trying to form words but failing. The villain taunted him, saying he hadn't done a good enough job silencing the little hero. With a swift kick, he sent Izuku crashing into a wall, where he lay, fighting to stay conscious as blood trickled from his mouth and stomach. The man stated that he didn't want to kill Izuku, believing him worthy of life, but warned that if he continued to cause trouble, he would have no choice. Todoroki arrived at the entrance of the blood-stained alleyway, demanding to know what was happening. Stain looked at him with annoyance, remarking on how the young heroes just kept coming. Todoroki responded with determination, unleashing a torrent of ice toward the villain. For a moment, he thought the threat was neutralized, but the ice shattered as one of Stain's knives sliced through it. Despite his relentless assault, Todoroki found himself on the defensive, his attacks easily countered. As he was backed against the wall, he heard a faint voice. Turning, he saw Izuku trying to speak, urging him to use his fire. Stain noticed Izuku as well, shifting his focus toward the small greenette. He taunted Izuku, who could barely respond. Just as Stain prepared to strike Izuku with another knife, the alleyway erupted in heat. Todoroki, filled with fear, unleashed flames upon the man threatening his classmates, careful not to let the fire harm Izuku or Ida. Stain succumbed to the overwhelming heat, losing consciousness. Izuku and Ida were freed from the villain's grip, but neither could move due to their injuries. Todoroki rushed to Native's side, checking for a pulse. He looked back at Izuku and Ida, who watched him with despair. Native was lost, 2 aspiring heroes were critically injured, and another was in shock, while the unconscious villain lay on the ground. 5 hours later, at Hosu City General Hospital, about 10 minutes after the hero killer was subdued, the professional heroes arrived. After addressing the boys for their reckless behavior, They were praised by the public for taking down the man who had terrorized Japan's streets. Fortunately, since no serious harm was inflicted on the villain, the boys faced no legal repercussions and were celebrated as heroes. However, both Izuku and Ida had lost consciousness on the way to the hospital. Thankfully, Ida had awakened a few hours earlier and was cleared to go home. Izuku had sustained the most injuries aside from native. Todoroki, being uninjured, accompanied him in the ambulance and provided the paramedics with necessary information. Izuku lay in his hospital bed while Todoroki settled on a couch nearby, waiting for him to regain consciousness. Just as Todoroki was about to doze off, the door swung open, and Shinso rushed to Izuku's side, followed by two tearful heroes. Shinso whispered in concern as he gazed at the fragile boy in the bed. Recognizing the emotional moment, Todoroki quietly exited the room, closing the door behind him. Hizashi and Shota each placed a comforting hand on Shinsu's shoulder. Izuku was wrapped in bandages, with small traces of dried blood at the corner of his mouth. Shinsu's heart ached as he carefully embraced Izuku. Izuku's eyes fluttered open, his voice barely a whisper, filled with pain. Small tears escaped his eyes as he struggled to speak. Shinso urged him to rest his voice, expressing his love and concern. As Izuku attempted to ask about his friends, a coughing fit overtook him. Hizashi quickly provided tissues as the fit continued, leaving a pile beside the bed. The three men fought back their tears, trying to remain strong for Izuku, who was now crying as well. Shota finally managed to reassure Izuku that both Ida and Todoroki were fine. Izuku nodded, overwhelmed by silent sobs. His fathers wrapped their arms around him, offering comfort and expressing their love, while also pulling Hitoshi into the embrace. They remained like that for a while until Izuku broke away, struggling to speak again. Wincing in pain, he gestured for a pen and paper. Hitoshi quickly provided them, and Izuku scribbled a message, apologizing for worrying them and explaining that he had rushed to help someone in distress, only to be silenced by the villain. Shota exchanged glances with Hizashi and Hitoshi before informing Izuku about his injuries, internal bleeding and a broken back, along with deep cuts on his leg, face, and stomach. Izuku nodded, then wrote another question, asking if All Might or Gran Torino knew where he was. Shota confirmed they were waiting outside and that Izuku could decide who to let in. After Hitoshi left to gather everyone, he returned with Class 1A, All Might, and Gran Torino. The room filled with voices as everyone expressed their concern and questions. Overwhelmed, Izuku began to hyperventilate, and the heart monitor's beeping quickened. Suddenly it stopped. Doctors rushed in, clearing the room before hastily wheeling Izuku away for emergency surgery. They fought to resuscitate him, and on the third attempt, they succeeded. Hitoshi, Shota, and Hizashi stood at a window, watching the intense scene unfold, tears streaming down their faces as they trembled with fear and grief. After an hour and a half in surgery, Izuku was returned to his room, looking pale and weak, with sweat glistening on his forehead. The doctors spoke to Hizashi and Shota, urging them to gather everyone close to Izuku, as they were uncertain if he would survive the night. Cliffhanger. Go Beyond. Plus Ultra. 2 years later, at UA High School, the story continues. High School Class 1A. Mr. Aizawa instructed the class to settle down, announcing that guest speakers would be joining them for the next 2 weeks to help develop their fighting styles and strengthen their quirks. A man of similar height to Mr. Aizawa entered the room, prompting whispers among the students. They speculated about his identity, recognizing him as Deku, the hero who had taken down Dabi, the notorious #1 villain. The students were amazed that he was already considered a pro while still in high school. Izuku stood at the front with his two best friends beside him. He suggested that Shoto start the introductions. However, Shoto deferred to Bakugu, who was ready to make a strong impression on the first-year students. Bakugu introduced himself with confidence, declaring his hero name as Ground Zero and expressing his determination to train the students to be the best first years the school had ever seen. He then explained his quirk, which allowed him to create explosions from his sweat, demonstrating with small bursts from his palm. Shoto introduced himself next, sharing his hero name and describing his quirk as half hot, half cold, showcasing his abilities with a brief display of fire and ice. Finally, Izuku introduced himself as well, explaining that his quirk, Ultimate Control, allowed him to manipulate anything within the range of his voice, granting him incredible strength that he had trained to surpass even All Might in his prime. He noted that he would demonstrate his control during their training sessions and instructed the students to change into their hero costumes for their first training session at Training Gym B. The trio of Izuku, Shoto, and Katsuki left the classroom, ready to guide the next generation of heroes. 5 years later, at a local chapel, a green-haired man dressed in white walked down the aisle, holding hands with a blonde man on one side and a man with dark hair on the other. All three had tears of joy on their faces, smiles wide as they approached the man in a black suit at the end of the aisle, who was beaming at his soon-to-be husband. Upon reaching the front, they embraced, and Izuku expressed his love and gratitude to his two dads before turning to Hitoshi, who greeted him with a warm smile. As the officiant began the ceremony, Izuku and Hitoshi remained focused on each other. When prompted, Izuku affirmed his commitment to Hitoshi, slipping a ring onto his finger. Hitoshi playfully paused before also affirming his vows, placing a ring on Izuku's finger. The officiant announced that they could share a kiss, and Izuku joyfully leaped into Hitoshi's arms, sealing their vows with a heartfelt kiss. Both men were overwhelmed with emotion, and after the kiss, Izuku nestled against Hitoshi, expressing his deep love. 6 years later, at the Shinzawa residence, a little girl with lime green eyes and black hair excitedly ran to Izuku, exclaiming that she had discovered her quirk. Izuku's face lit up with pride as he lifted her into his arms, eager to share the news with Hitoshi. Hitoshi rushed into the room, eager to learn about their daughter's quirk. The little girl demonstrated her ability by making her toys float slightly above the ground and guiding them toward herself. Izuku was both shocked and elated, lifting her up once more. He expressed his happiness and love for both his daughter and Hitoshi, pulling them into a warm embrace and reminding them of his unwavering affection. My two favorite shows have been combined. The excitement was overwhelming, and the anticipation was almost too much to bear. In a world where the heroes from both shows faced off against a common threat, the stakes were higher than ever. The air crackled with tension as they prepared for battle, their resolve unyielding. Each character brought their unique strengths to the forefront, ready to confront the challenges ahead. As the clash began, the heroes moved with incredible speed and agility, dodging and weaving through the chaos. The ground trembled beneath them, and the atmosphere was charged with energy. They fought valiantly, their determination shining through as they faced formidable foes. With every encounter, the heroes pushed their limits, showcasing their skills and teamwork. The battles were intense, filled with daring maneuvers and strategic thinking. Each victory brought them closer to their ultimate goal, but the journey was fraught with peril. Despite the challenges, camaraderie blossomed among the heroes. They shared moments of laughter and encouragement, forging bonds that would last a lifetime. Together, they faced the darkness, united by their shared purpose and unwavering spirit. As the final confrontation loomed, the heroes stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. Their hearts beat in unison, fueled by hope and determination. This was more than just a fight. It was a testament to their strength and the power of friendship.